Hello and welcome to another video. This is the 8th episode of the story, where Naruto's journey through life after his battle at the Valley of the End reveals what it truly means to be strong in a world filled with shinobi, conspiracy, and the concepts of good and evil. Please support us by liking and subscribing. Let's just get started. Naruto awoke groggily at the crack of dawn, only vaguely aware of the current situation. That is, until it came crashing down upon his consciousness like a 71-ton anvil. He groaned and buried his face in his hands. His team had been tacked on this caravan for the sole purpose of guarding it, and they had been attacked, resulting in numerous casualties. The only plus is that no one from Konoha was seriously hurt. Thank Kami-sama for Ino and Sakura-chan, he thought as he stretched himself out for the day. Emerging from his tent, he found himself facing a familiar back and a wondrous smell, which he recognized as fried bread. "Hinata-chan, if that breakfast is for me, you really are an angel descended from," Naruto began, but stopped as she turned around and met his gaze. Slowly and deliberately, with the most teasing look he had ever seen in her eyes, Hinata held the piece of fried dough that all ninja partook of on the job, as it was fortified with nutrients and vitamins that made even Shikamaru's brain ache to think of all of them. She had wrapped in a cloth up in front her as if presenting it to Naruto. He began to lick his lips hungrily when the bread began to float away. "No," he whispered in despair as Hinata, never breaking eye contact with him, brought it closer to her mouth, which began to widen. She bit into it, now closing her eyes and humming sensually as she made sure that Naruto knew that her tongue was gently tasting every bit of the tasty staple. To his credit, the Hokage-to-be lasted longer than Hinata had anticipated, but his ensuing reaction was a bit beyond her preparation. Naruto yelled something that a cow might emit while having its rear wailed on with a rubber mallet and tackled Hinata. Not even considering her blush at the rather naughty mount he had placed on her, Naruto leapt to his feet and, with a disturbingly sincere moan of pleasure, stuffed the remainder of the bread in his mouth, closing his eyes with bliss. "Ah no, maybe I shouldn't have done that," Hinata mumbled, still in shock from her good morning hug. When Naruto finished, it was as if he had come out of a trance. "Oh heyo, Hinata-chan. Why are you sitting on the floor?" Naruto asked, extending a hand to help his girlfriend up. Hinata decided that if Naruto was going to ignore what had just happened, she would too, also deciding that for now they were even. She accepted his helping hand, only mildly, but pleasantly, surprised when he pulled her in for a quick kiss. "Did you sleep all right?" he asked sincerely. Hinata checked his eyes, noticing that the silver pupil of his now activated Sharingan had become slightly slitted, and wondered when that had happened. Filing it into the back of her head, she shrugged. "Well enough, I suppose." She looked him squarely in the eye. "How are you feeling about all this?" she asked him bluntly. Darting back and forth, the blonde Sharingan finally settled back on Hinata's pearl eyes. "I feel like I've failed the mission even though the vast majority of the caravan survived," he said after a while. "We were hired to guard this caravan because we're supposedly the strongest team in Konoha, but I can't help but feel defeated," he trailed off. Hinata placed a firm hand on his shoulder. "And why?" "We won, didn't we?" she asked. Naruto sighed. "It's just Ero-sen and Jiraiya trained me to be a warrior shinobi. If anything, I'm actually an assassin because of my stealth, but still. I just feel like I should be suited to handle situations like this, and yet so many died," he exclaimed. "You know what I feel like, Hinata-chan? I feel like I'm not focusing enough on what makes me the shinobi I am. I think I need to refocus my training. I've been trying to do it all, long range, mid-range, and short range, ninjutsu, taijutsu, and the Sharingan isn't helping. As the Hokage, I'm gonna have to be able to defend the village swiftly and ruthlessly without hesitation, and I can't be sitting behind my desk wondering which jutsu I should use." He took a deep breath, but before he could continue Hinata had kissed him. He blinked, and Hinata closed in for the kill. "Naruto-kun, you're right, but you don't need to beat yourself up over it, nor should you forget all the jutsu you learned from Jiraiya." "Do you want my opinion?" she asked, and to her surprise he nodded mutely. Boldened, she continued. Before you left with Jiraiya, you were the worst genin in our class when it came to chakra control, but you do things with that demonic chakra that now naturally courses through your veins that even Niji, Sakura, and I find extremely difficult, yet, you do it at a moment's notice without even thinking. You've turned your weakness into your greatest strength, so run with it, she finished. Naruto stared at her, and then pulled her into a hug. Thanks, Hinata-chan. You're really something amazing, and I'm thanks. Hinata grinned. It's not a problem. Now let's help Shikamaru-kun before he kills Haku. Soon, they had arrived at the remnants of grass, which to their shock were not that horrible. With your help, we should be finished with repairs in a few weeks, the Jounin Oyaban from Grass said to Shikamaru optimistically. For once, Shikamaru did not reply with sarcasm, pleased that the village was overlooked by Akatsuki when Konoha loomed in the horizon. Shikamaru turned to Naruto's group. Sasuke and Sakura were whispering quietly, Haku looked bored, Kira looked like she wanted to go home, and Hinata stood beside Naruto quietly with a strangely accepting smile on her pale visage. Take care of home, Naruto, Shikamaru said as they clasped forearms. Naruto nodded, then grinned and moved to whisper in Shikamaru's ear. Maybe you can Chuji to confess to Ino, he sure looks pretty good these days, Naruto said evilly. Shikamaru, despite himself, nodded. Might be fun, he reasoned, eyeing his two teammates who were trying to get Shino to say more than 2 words in a row. Goodbyes were exchanged, and supplies were given to Naruto's team so they wouldn't have to forage for food on the way back to Konoha. So I guess that's it then, don't you think that was a little anticlimactic? Kira asked Naruto as they began to leap through the trees back to Konoha. Not being waylaid, the caravan made the trip a lot quicker. Naruto estimated they would reach Konoha by tomorrow evening. Naruto shrugged. We were attacked by the leader of Akatsuki's old village. Frankly, the minute that happened I ceased to give a crap about the caravan, because if someone out there is trying to mess with the whole freaking world again. He left his sentence unfinished. Anyways, for right now we should be focusing on how our team will operate in the future, because we have the potential to take a wide variety of A and S-class missions thanks to our wide variety of skills. But we need to keep our skills meshing and improve our teamwork, Naruto said as he led the team back to Konoha. Kira's face became downcast as she heard Naruto's words. It'd be fun to stay with Naruto-kun, Haku-kun, and the others, but I kind of miss Iwagakure, she thought sadly, torn between her friends and her beloved home. Sachikage-sama will need me once the alliance with Konoha is settled, I just know it. Haku noticed that Kira looked far from happy. Cheer up, Kira-chan, he shouted, black ponytail flapping in the wake of his travel. You'll improve, I just know it, he added cheekily. Kira giggled at Haku's misinterpretation of the source of her pain, but was relieved anyways. He's right, in a way. I should focus on the present and what I have right now. However, it was as if Haku's remedy was only temporary, and Kira's concerns were back in force a few moments later, that is, until they decided to set up camp for the night and Hinata began to cook dinner with what supplies they had. Oh! Haku exclaimed suddenly when the heavenly smell wafted into his nose and said, hello. That smell. Hinata, what is that? He asked excitedly. This is food, Hinata said dryly, indicating the cast iron bowl with mocking flair. Then she stood up. And there's no sense in hiding it. I am a master chef, she said commandingly, thrusting a cooking ladle-filled fist into the air. Everyone stared. A laugh erupted from Sakura, who reacted by eating her fist, after which only muffled grunts and hiccups could be heard. Sasuke, true to form, cracked not even a grin, but Naruto, who knew the Sharingan user well, could almost hear the laughter that racked the Uchiha's brain, and was not surprised when the corners of his mouth began to twitch. Getting up, Naruto walked over to Hinata and placed a hand on her fist, which was still pumped into the air. Hinata-chan, the food, he said, as if reminding a child to use the bathroom next time, and the Hyuga jumped, kneeling down to stir the pot, a faint red tinge gracing her cheeks, which Naruto thought was cute. Finally, the stew was ready, and they all sat down. About halfway through the meal, Sasuke broke the silence. Hinata, this food, he said haltingly. Hinata smiled sweetly at him. Yes, Sasuke-kun, she prompted. He gulped. It's really, really good, he said, as if choking on a tomato, then buried his nose in his stew, eating furiously. There, now that wasn't so hard, was it? I'll bet it felt kind of good. Sakura said soothingly as she patted Sasuke's back. A muffled sob erupted from Sasuke's face, but as it was buried in the bowl it emerged as a bubble of broth, which popped, flinging a surprisingly large amount of tasty broth at Sakura. Her teammates watched in horror as her left eye began to flutter. Naruto inched backward involuntarily, remembering what this signaled, a thrashing, and he thanked Kami-sama that it wasn't him this time, and would be for once Sasuke. Sasuke-kun? Sakura said sweetly. Sasuke pulled his head away from his stew to look at Sakura. But his vision was obscured, and with a sound splat, pun intended, Sakura's bowl of stew had covered Sasuke's face and began to merrily drip all over his navy blue garb. Sasuke blinked slowly, and then extended a finger for them all to see. They all stared at it as Sasuke then brought it to the stew dripping from his nose and dipped it in. He stuck his finger in his mouth and sucked it. Nodding, he scooped some more broth from his head and extended the dripping hand to Naruto, who had finished his stew. Want some more stew, Naruto? Sasuke said with the dignity of a British butler. His friends lost it, and the campfire erupted with laughter. Thanks to the restored camaraderie of the team, it didn't seem to take long at all until Konoha's massive new gate loomed in the horizon. It didn't seem tedious at all to Naruto when they delivered their mission report, and nor were they nervous when Tsunade steeped her hands and regarded them critically after they related the attack on their caravan. Finally, I can't say that I'm disappointed, but frankly I'm surprised you suffered so many casualties, Tsunade said. Naruto nodded. I was worried too. Frankly, Tsunade-sama, I was concerned as to whether my teammates and I were slacking off, but the attacking numbers were too great. Perhaps I could have summoned more Kagebushin earlier, we'll never know, and frankly what is most important is learning from this hitch in an otherwise successful mission. Naruto inhaled after his little speech, unaware of the stares of awe that focused on the blonde and usually loud Jounin. Tsunade grinned. Half of me wants to check and see if that's really you, Naruto, she said mockingly. Naruto grinned. Only half? That makes me want to check and see if you're really the Bachan, but the Sharingan sees that it is your usual grumpy and slightly intoxicated self, so he ducked the hurled projectile and continued to grin cheekily. Hinata breathed a sigh of relief that Naruto was still Naruto. Baka, but that's beside the point. For right now I want you to forget about that mission, Tsunade began, but she was interrupted. Tsunade-sama, how can you say that? Sakura blurted out. Some shinobi come out of nowhere, attack and kill regardless of ninja or civilian status, and you want us to forget about it? She asked in disbelief. Tsunade stared at her former apprentice until she looked away. Yes, I do, Sakura. And they didn't come out of nowhere, as you put it. We know what village they're from. What I'm worried about is what they're after. Pain said that he had killed Hanzo. Before I killed him. Does that help at all? Naruto supplied hopefully. Yet after the words left his mouth, Tsunade went pale. Why didn't you tell me this earlier? She exclaimed. Naruto almost went as white as his Hokage, shuddering at the implication. Something in this world gave the last legendary Sannin fear, something that Naruto should probably also be fearing. What are trying to get at, Bachan? Naruto asked gently, trying to keep the situation from getting hysterical. Tsunade shook her head. You have no idea who Hanzo the Salamander is? Tsunade asked Naruto in disbelief. Sakura would have laughed if the situation wasn't so dire. Why would I know about some lizard? Besides, he's dead, right? Naruto asked. Despite his heightened maturity, It seemed that one thing Jiraiya missed during those long 3 years was a filler for his lack of an academy education, despite his graduation. Naruto, Hanzo was the most powerful ninja in the world. It was in a battle against him that the three Sannin of Konoha were born. Orochimaru, Jiraiya, and I were fighting against the forces of Amigakure, who had allied with Iwa in the last great shinobi war. Kira bowed her head. Tsunade saw this in her peripheral and filed that away for later, otherwise ignoring it. We had managed to kill all of the enemy shinobi except their leader. He, like most of the Aim Nin, wore a breathing mask, but this one was huge and covered his entire face. We could never see his face, except for red eyes. We fought him, but he was strong, too strong. Stronger than any shinobi alive. To put this situation in perspective, Naruto, he could probably kill you if he really wanted to. Naruto gulped. What do you mean by, really wanted to? Hinata asked with no small amount of trepidation. Tsunade sighed. Jiraiya wanted to keep fighting, but Orochimaru and I knew we were beaten. But for some reason, Hanzo didn't finish us off. Instead, he complimented our strength and demanded that we live on as the legendary Sannin of Konoha. Then he just left, she finished someway anticlimactically. She groaned and rummaged aimlessly for a bottle of sake while massaging her skull with her free hand. If Jiraiya were alive, I'd send him to Amigakure to gather some intel, but he would have been the only one to get in there and out alive, if anyone was capable. Thoughts began to whirl inside Naruto's head, too quickly for him to act on them at the moment. Sasuke unknowingly stalled for time that none of the ninja in the room thought they needed. So what are your orders, Hokage-sama? He asked politely, albeit bluntly. Tsunade took a swig of the newfound rice wine and swirled it thoughtfully around in her mouth for a bit. Then, go home. Then, for the next few weeks, train to the brink of death until I call for you otherwise. I'll write up a sanction for the use of the Forest of Death for your team. Live there until you get bored or something, she said, turning around in her chair to face the skyline of Konoha. You are dismissed. The team of extraordinary shinobi and kunoichi bowed and turned to leave. Naruto remained. Naruto-kun? Kira asked when she noticed that their loud leader wasn't with them. He smiled brightly. Don't worry about me, there was something I wanted to ask Bachan real quick. Kira shook her head. It's not that, you're the only one who can get into our house. Naruto's face fell, and he fished around in his weapons pouch until he found and pulled forth 5 seals. Memorize this kanji, then destroy it. It's the unlocking seal for the doors and windows. You can only open them from the outside by writing it on the door, Naruto said as he handed the papers to Kira. When did you have time to do this? Kira asked in wonder. Naruto grinned, and Kira almost knew what he was going to say before he did. Kage Bunshin no Jutsu. After everyone had gone, and it was just Naruto and the Hokage, he cleared his throat. But before he could begin, Tsunade cut him off. Absolutely not. Naruto got mad. Damn it, Tsunade, you and I both know I can do this. You know what Jiraiya taught me, you know exactly what I am capable of, and you know that if I don't do this, Konoha could be threatened with total destruction. Again. I'm sick and tired of assholes who think the only way to have fun in this world is to take control of as much of it as they can, he yelled, building to an angry rant at the end. Tsunade turned back to face Naruto, and he was shocked to see tears in her eyes, unshed, but they're just the same. Bachan, he said softly. She bowed her head. I can't bear the thought of losing you too, she said chokingly. She angrily attacked her eyes with the long green sleeve of her jacket. You're just like him, too. Always running into the most dangerous situations because you're the only one who can. She sniffed slightly, then her face was stern once again. This is an order, Naruto. You had better come back here with something to report, or don't come back at all, she shouted, pointing a menacing finger at him. Naruto stared at her, then slowly extended his own finger and hooked it around Tsunade's. "That's a promise," he replied smugly. Tsunade giggled despite herself. "Have you thought about what you're going to tell your teammates?" she asked, knowing exactly how Hinata would react to the news. Naruto's cheeks went red. "I'll think of something. I've got a few days, after all." Turning away once more, Tsunade laughed. "Think hard, Gaki. Think long and hard." Dismissed. Naruto bowed, secure in that Tsunade would never see it, and left. "Okay, he's leaving." Hinata relayed to the others. "He'll be out in a little bit." "I wonder what he was going on about in there," Sakura wondered aloud. Sasuke shrugged. "Probably wondering when Hokage-sama will retire," he said, staring off into space. "It's so weird to think of him as the Hokage," Kira said as she sat on the ground outside the Hokage's mansion. "Sure, he's strong and brave, courageous, smart, talented, really good looking," she trailed off. "Ah, Hinata-chan, you sure got lucky," she said playfully. Hinata blushed. Haku went red as well, but for a different reason. "You're telling me?" "You have no idea how happy I was when I finally got his attention," Hinata replied. "Finally? What do you mean by that?" Haku asked, puzzled. "She had liked me for years, and I just never caught on," Naruto said, having heard the tail end of the conversation. Hinata blushed even redder. "Shut up. You only figured it out about 8 years after the fact." 8. That's a really long time," Hinata accused, not really sure why she was getting so worked up. Naruto pecked her on the cheek. "But I finally caught on, didn't I?" he asked teasingly. Hinata just huffed, but the others could tell she was pleased. "So, what's the big secret, Naruto?" Sakura asked, placing herself in front of their leader. Naruto looked her in the eye. "You'll all find out at the end of the week. For now, we'd better get some rest and figure out how we're gonna do this training thing," he said, smoothly dodging the question and the pink-haired Kunoichi and continuing down the street. After a while, the group shrugged and followed in his wake. When they arrived at the Uzumaki compound, Naruto immediately whipped up a pot of rice with some chicken he found in the fridge that was still good and served a Spartan dinner, complete with broccoli. A well-balanced meal. "So, what now, fearless leader?" Haku asked teasingly as they finished their meal. Naruto sat back in his chair thoughtfully, aware that eyes were on him. How the hell should I know?" he tossed out apprehensively. Everyone sighed. "Naruto, how can you not have thought of something by now?" Sasuke asked wonderingly. Naruto shook his head. "That wasn't really the impression I was trying to give. What I really want to say is, why can't we keep doing what we doing? But apparently that doesn't but it anymore," Naruto asked. He leaned back in his seat, admiring his teammates' empty plates. "What I think Bachan wants us to do is become a more functional team. She knows we can handle ourselves, but what she really needs is a squad of shinobi that can handle any and all situations." He leaned forward. "Let's be honest with ourselves, we are an anomaly. Why would the leader of a village concentrate her most powerful shinobi into a 6-man unit? Wouldn't it make more sense to spread the power around? Also, why are we 6, when we should really be 2-3s or at least distributed to other groups?" he asked plaintively. Sakura nodded. "Like when we first became genin." Sasuke nodded. "They acted like they were distributing the strength, but in reality they placed teams based on what missions they were meant to take. Like how Sasuke-kun and Naruto-kun and I were a team. And how Kiba, Shino, and I were a team. That was a lot of tracking shinobi on one team, nay?" Hinata added. Naruto nodded approvingly. "We need to work on our teamwork. We need to learn how to survive and depend on each other in the chaos of a shinobi fight. The more we work on eliminating enemies as a team, the more efficient we'll be as a team." Naruto confirmed. But what if we get into a situation like the caravan attack? Haku asked. Naruto grinned. Partner training was all he said through the fox-like grin. And with that, Naruto stood and demanded they all get sleep. And no breakfast tomorrow, he added cheerfully as he kissed Hinata goodnight and stalked off to the section of the house where he, Sasuke, and Haku slept. Sasuke followed after an awkward goodnight with Sakura, who followed Hinata. No goodnight kiss from the Uchiha? Hinata asked teasingly. Sakura lightly punched her arm. No fair, I'm still working on it, she shot back. Hinata giggled. You should be more forceful, I'll bet Sasuke-kun likes being taken. Hinata said with a sly grin. Sakura blushed and took off after Hinata, who ran to her room and slammed the door. This left Haku and Kira, and one of them decided to bring up a problem. So you're worried about training with a team you might not be on for much longer, nay? Haku asked, before Kira could say anything. Shocked at how on the mark his comment was, she nodded. I'm not sure about how I feel right now, I'm kinda homesick, but at the same time I've never felt more, she trailed off, uncertain. She looked at Haku helplessly. At home, he supplied. Kira sighed. I just don't know what it is I want. Haku stood up and gripped Kira's shoulders. Look at me, he requested softly. Kira looked him in the eye, green meeting soft brown. How do you feel about that Sachikage? He asked, taking Kira by surprise once more. He's like a father to me, she answered instantly. Haku nodded, as if expecting the quick reply. And what about Naruto-kun and Sasuke-kun, and Sakura-chan and Hinata-chan? He pressed. Kira smiled. They're like brothers and sisters, they're the first friends I've had, really, she said softly, knowing where Haku was going with this. But don't you want to know how I feel about you? She asked playfully. Haku grinned. I already know how you feel about me. Kira smiled, and Haku was reminded of a cat stalking a mouse as she moved closer to him. Oh. And just what does my heart tell you, Haku-kun? She asked, her voice becoming lower. Haku looked up at the ceiling. You like me, because I surprise you and challenge you despite the fact that you could tear my face off before I could blink, he said confidently. Thus, when he looked back into Kira's eyes he was disturbed to see tears. Oops, he muttered. But she shook her head and hugged him tightly, burying her head in his shoulder. His arms went instantly around her back. She held the embrace for a moment, then pulled away slightly. How do you do that? She asked. Haku looked puzzled. Do what? She sighed. How do you know exactly what I'm thinking? She asked helplessly. For a moment nothing happened. Then Kira felt a hand pull her chin upward and Haku's lips gently brushed her own. Because you're the only one I've ever been able to understand, he answered simply. I can't explain it, and I'm fine with that. I'm just content to run with things as they are. Maybe that's what you need to do. You're in Konoha now, and you will be until Tsunade-sama is done with the treaty. So until then, enjoy yourself. Work hard, and things will happen, he added with a wink. Kira smacked his arm. You're the only one who can get away with that, you know, she said as she turned to leave. Haku watched her go with a grin, waiting until she was gone. Then, so that means I'm your only boyfriend? Satisfied with her muffled expletive, he made his way to his room for much-needed sleep. Tomorrow would prove to be quite a workout. Alright, we'll split into groups based on our abilities. Sakura-chan, you'll be paired with Kira-chan, Haku will partner with Sasuke, and Hinata-chan will work with me, Naruto explained. It was a bright day, and Naruto had made sure that his team reserved one of Konoha's open-area training fields. Haku glared. How come you're conveniently working with your girlfriend while the rest of us are separated? Haku complained. Naruto sent him a death glare, Sharingan flashing red before reverting to slivery blue. Because I just said we'll work according to ability. If the words of command are not clear and distinct, if orders are not thoroughly understood, then the general is to blame. Do you know who said that? Naruto asked. Haku shook his head. Sun Tzu, Sakura said proudly, ignoring Sasuke's muttered, typical. Correct. So I'll explain. Sakura-chan is working with Kira-chan because she's our medic need. She needs protection, but to have someone exclusively protect someone so powerful in combat and skilled in evasion is a waste, so Kira will not only watch Sakura-chan's back but also use her Doton Jutsu from afar. You know more than what you tried on me, right? Naruto directed his last question to Kira. When she nodded, he grinned. Good, that'll be interesting to test in combat. An enemy ninja will get close to you at their own peril, with the taijutsu you two have. Haku, you're with Sasuke because you're both fast, have conflicting ninjutsu and fantastic taijutsu. What does conflicting elements have to do with us working together? Haku asked, genuinely wondering. If we combine our attacks, if say I use a Katon Jutsu and you use one of your Ice or Doton Jutsu, the enemy can't block effectively against both, and if you use a Futon Jutsu, our attacks will increase the effectiveness of the other, Sasuke explained. The same goes for my Raiton Jutsu. Show off, Naruto muttered with another grin. Sasuke shot it back, and Naruto went on. Hinata-chan's working with me because our styles of combat both focus on incredibly fast, accurate, and devastating damage and make use of pure chakra. Her control exceeds mine, but not by much. My own ninjutsu supporting her or her long-range Juken technique supporting me are what we'll be focusing on. That makes a lot of sense, Naruto-kun, though I know better than to be surprised by now, Sakura commented. Naruto shrugged. We all have our strengths and weaknesses. Ero Sennin made sure I knew that. Now we'll try something new. I'm gonna make a squad of Kage Bunshin for each of our groups. They'll fight to kill, but you should still have no trouble dispelling them. Just remember to take this seriously. This will also work well because all the knowledge my clones receive about your combat will transfer to me. Sakura-chan, watch your genjutsu range. If you try any, Naruto explained, forming a seal and creating 18 clones. Separate, and let's do this. The objective is to dispel all the clones. Hajime. At Naruto's command, the clones split into 3 groups of 6 across the training field they had reserved from the Hokage. Naruto's team split as well, and they ran to engage their opponents, all of which had the Sharingan and all of which were forming seals. Sakura and Kira split apart and began to run a figure-8 pattern towards the 6 clones they were to defeat. However, when they reached a point where their paths crossed, Naruto's clones suddenly leapt into action, the one forming seals finishing the technique setting his feet properly. He launched into a Kaden-like spin, launching chakra-laden air sickles at the pair, the others using their 9-tailed taijutsu. The sickles collided with Kira, who was in the lead, tearing her into lateral pieces and continuing into Sakura, treating her likewise. Both transformed into rocks and fell to the ground in pieces. 2 poofs indicated that 2 clones were taken out. Sakura and Kira had leapt apart from one another at that split instant before death, enacting a Kawarimi and attacking a clone each. However, they were both attacked by Naruto's clones, each wielding tails of chakra in different ways, some like scorpion stingers and others like sword arms. The one who used the Futon Jutsu drew Makai and charged. Kira ducked and weaved around the 2 clones' tails, moving like water and striking back when she could. But Naruto had, over the years, instructed his clones to dodge rather than block attacks, improving their usefulness in combat. Sakura was hard-pressed with her clone, but quickly formed a plan. Suddenly breaking off combat, she ran towards Kira, forming seals and marking the 3 clones they were fighting with chakra. She finished the technique as she ran into Kira. To the clones it appeared that Sakura ran into Kira, disappearing inside her, but what really happened was that Sakura went into a roll. Kira jumped backwards over her, planting her hands and delivering a spinning kick to an unsuspecting clone in pursuit. Sakura herself flicked 2 kunai at the other 2 clones, dispelling them. Then she leapt backwards as the last clone nearly decapitated her with Makai. Recovering flawlessly, the clone ran to Sakura, who was backing away and feigning distress, until Kira finished her Doton Jutsu, and a spike of rock appeared in front of the clone. There was a puff of smoke. Kira breathed a sigh of relief and pulled her fist out of the ground. Sakura grinned at her partner and flashed the victory sign, but put on a puzzled look when Kira leapt forward and swept her legs out from underneath her. Makai whistled past her head, taking the ends of her hair as it fluttered upwards. The cut turned into a thrust, catching Kira on the arm. Sakura used the brief opening to thrust a chakra punch into the clone's solar plexus, and it was dispelled. She then set to healing Kira's wound. "Thanks," she said with relief when the wound was closed. Sakura nodded. "Puncture wounds are the worst. I'm glad I was here." "Come on, let's watch the others." Sasuke and Haku began by forming seals for respective jutsu as the squad of clones drew their Makai and charged, creating a coating of wind on the blade with their jutsu. Haku, seeing this, abandoned his jutsu and met their charge. As Sasuke finished his jutsu, he saw Haku gather his demonic chakra, marveling at its sharp nature. Sasuke's Hausenka no Jutsu, Phoenix Flames, flew towards the clones, two of which tried to block with their wind-charged katana, which resulted in the same amount of small firestorms around the clones. Sasuke was barely aware of the scattering of the clones' chakra into nothingness, instead beginning his next jutsu as he ran towards Haku, who was fending off the other clones. Every time a clone made an attack or flurry, Haku swiped his hand across the path of the blade, creating a sheet of wind which. Such was the nature of his chakra that the blade stopped cold when meeting the shields. Had they not been covered in a futon jutsu themselves, they might have been marred, if they were normal katana. Such was the power of the Kenjutsu Kage Bunshin that it created near-perfect replicas of the used in his possessions. One of the clones used its Sharingan to activate the power of Makai. It gleamed, and the next shield Haku erected was obliterated. Unfazed, Haku simply swiped forward, shooting out an arc of wind and dispelling the clone. By now, Sasuke's last jutsu was finished, and he splayed his hands, out of which spewed arcs of lightning which he was able to direct with the Sharingan despite the speed at which they traveled. Such was Haku's speed that, as Sasuke finished his jutsu, he gathered his chakra once more and whipped through a jutsu, creating a small whirlwind around his form. Sasuke grinned and directed all the lightning he could at Haku. The result was a small storm which struck clones and the ground at random. When the clones were dispelled, Sasuke ceased the jutsu and slumped slightly. Haku sent him a questioning look, but Sasuke waved it off and stood straight. "All that's left is Naruto and Hinata," Haku remarked lightly, brushing away some dust and fingering a small tear in his robes where a Makai slipped through his guard. Hinata ducked and wove through the torrent of chakra lashing around her, weaving her strings of chakra as quickly and fluidly as she could. Back to back with her stood Naruto, two tails extending out of his arms. They twisted and turned in perfect sync with the other, attacking high after the other had went low, catching the clones off balance and disorienting them. And just when the clones seemed to move in tune with the spinning pair, they would switch direction, never leaving the other behind. Finally, Naruto managed to dispel a clone with a hit to the chest, arm extended in a thrust. Hinata grabbed his collar and yanked him backwards, using the momentum to swap placed with him and palm thrust two clones in the face. As Naruto was yanked backwards, he jumped off the ground and placed his left hand on the ground, drawing Makai with his right. When the blade was free, he let his left arm buckle and, turning on the ground, reversed his roll and came up facing the last three clones, blade hissing through the air to catch a clone in the side of the neck. The next one in line blocked with one of his chakra tails, and the other scribed a seal with the Sharingan into the ground beneath Naruto, who recognized it and scribed his own seal on top of it, creating a mound of densely packed chakra-reinforced earth, which was blown apart by the explosion scribed underneath it. The clone died immediately after from a chakra beam to the forehead, and Naruto summoned all 9 of his tails at once and leapt to the last clone. Instead of taking the feint, the last clone drew Makai and parried Naruto's blows with his sword and his own tails, and caught a Rasengan in the back. After the enemy clone was dispelled, Naruto recalled his own clone that he had made and went to sheath Makai. However, before he could, his instincts screamed and he brought Makai up parallel to his head and pushed it across with his other hand, deflecting a straight thrust aimed for his head. Across the field, Sakura and Kira were beset by a green blur, out of which erupted strikes faster than the eye could see. Sasuke and Haku were attacked by an identical blur, and Hinata found herself in a Juken duel. Naruto spun around and raised his blade to parry a diagonal slash, turning the block into a strike to the neck, which was promptly deflected as Tenten pulled the hilt of her, and Naruto had to blink twice and scan it with the Sharingan to ensure the reality. Kodachi up, fulcruming around Naruto's force and drawing his blade down. She leapt forward, slamming the hilt into Naruto's face, or tried to. Naruto was already pivoting around her, turning Tenten's deflection into the beginning of an upward slash. Hinata ducked and weaved under Niji's assault, taking his attacks and returning them, every now and then dodging entirely when he tried to assault her tenketsu and attempted to return the favor. Without warning, he broke away and crouched down low, hands held in a line at an angle with the ground away from her, and spun into the opening strikes of Hakurokukin Sho. Mimicking his motions, Hinata spun into the technique as well, adding her chakra beams and blocking Niji's strikes as they escalated from 2 to 64. However, she was a millisecond too slow, and Niji managed to land a hit on her shoulder, sealing a tenketsu and slowing her left arm's movement. Undeterred, Hinata dropped and spun, bringing a foot up into a kick at Niji's head, which connected and forced him away. He recovered, turning his tumble into a roll and coming up into another charge. Hinata crouched as she watched his chakra form into wind. Sasuke and Haku could only defend against Lee's relentless fury, defend and search fruitlessly for an opening they could exploit. Finally, Haku had the chance to break away. He quickly formed a few seals, ending on his personal blood seal, and used his chakra to draw water from the air, manipulating both at once to form his Isenban, which he began to fling at Lee. Sasuke sensed the impending chakra and leapt away as the barrage hit Lee. When the dust cleared, he was nowhere to be found. Haku lowered his arms and jumped high into the air as Lee exploded out of the ground beneath him. The green beast was kicked away by Sasuke, however, who had watched Lee's chakra as it moved with the Sharingan. Before Lee landed, he whipped through 10 seals, ending on Tiger, and emitted the Ryuka no Jutsu, Dragon Flames technique. The area in front of Sasuke erupted into flames and he scanned them intently, knowing that Lee would probably evade the technique. He had, and was charging for Sasuke when a mirror of ice was erected in his path, out of which Haku came and fisted the green beast in the nose. Sasuke had been on the receiving end of that technique before, Senbon replacing fists, but he didn't recall Haku moving as swiftly as he did just then to beat Lee's reactions. Demonic chakra really creepy, he decided. Sakura and Kira were actually having fun with their battle. Madogai was as strong as Lee and just as fast, but Sakura and Kira had been trained to be unsurpassable at evasion. Kira's movements were graceful and elegant, always causing Guy to miss by a hair's breadth. Sakura was ruthless and efficient, because despite her improved stamina, her control still far exceeded her chakra capacity and she reserved as much as she could, minimizing her movements and leaving no openings, waiting for the moment to strike. If your opponent is skilled, he will not give you an opening. Thus, you must make one yourself, Sakura recalled from her tutelage under Tsunade. She whipped her fist into the ground, shattering the earth and making the playing field interesting, as well as revealing something unexpected. Kakashi-sensei, she said with no small amount of surprise. The surprised XNBU member winked and leapt out of the crater. Around them, the individual scuffles ground to a halt, and Guy walked over to stand next to Kakashi. I was aware of the fires of youth in your pupils and Kurenai's student, Kakashi, but who are these two? Their youthful exuberance truly fills me with joy. Guy exclaimed gleefully. Kira and Haku edged away nervously after approaching the group, but Naruto patted Haku's shoulder. Don't worry, he seems like a pedophile, but his tastes are normal in that regard. He's just a little eccentric, Naruto. Your capacity for understatement astounds me, Niji replied dryly, but Naruto just laughed. Actually, I have no idea, Kakashi said in reply to Guy's question, causing the heavily eyebrowed Jounin to howl in defeat. Just kidding. I know the one, I killed him, in fact. The other, though, really is unknown to me, but she seems familiar somehow. Haku stared menacingly at Kakashi for a moment, then laughed. Copy Ninja Kakashi. We meet yet again, and under friendly circumstances. Kakashi chuckled softly. Glad you don't hold a grudge. Haku shrugged. You did your duty, I did mine. Who can hold that against anyone? He asked rhetorically, and Kakashi nodded at the boy's understanding. He turned to Kira. We've met, but we never really had a chance for a proper introduction. Your surname is Shashiya, correct? Kira sighed. You fought in the Iwa Konoha War, correct? Specifically, you fought my mother. Kakashi nodded solemnly. She was an excellent shinobi. I didn't fight her myself, but there aren't many with red hair and green eyes like yours. I am sorry for your loss. Kira shook her head. Spare me your pity, for a Jinchuriki, I had a great upbringing, one that I am sure was not shared by the other Jinchuriki. Kakashi nodded once, and that was that. He turned to Naruto. I decided to observe your training. I was going to ambush you myself, but I wasn't expecting Teen Guy to take my fun away. He looked at Naruto appraisingly. I don't think Konoha has anything to fear with a Rokudaime like you, Naruto. Naruto smiled. Arigato gozaimasu, Kakashi-sensei. Tenten tapped him on the shoulder then, and he turned to see her extending her kodachi towards Naruto. Go on, you know you want to, she offered brightly. Naruto acquired a hungry look in his eye and took the kodachi from Tenten, marveling at its balance and strength. Two-san thinks we can shorten and straighten Makai without damaging it in any way or removing any of its unusual qualities. What do you think? She asked as Naruto returned the blade with a bow. Naruto nodded enthusiastically. I'll come with you after we're done here, he assured her. This partner thing worked pretty well for you guys, Kakashi was telling Sakura. Do you think Naruto wants to replace the teams of 3 genin when he becomes Hokage? She asked. Kakashi shook his head, the motion being mimicked by Naruto. I think the teams of 3 with a squad leader works really well. This is more suited to our purposes and allows us to essentially perform any mission, but the success of the village depends on a variety of missions being taken at the same time. With the squad system we have now, Konoha can accept almost as many missions as we have active ninja for, Naruto explained. Also, don't forget that never in the history of the ninja world has there ever been a case of the Jinchuriki working together, Kakashi added dryly. Usually they just try to kill each other and everyone around them. Naruto nodded. Yeah, that too. Well, that was pretty good for the first day. Just remember, fight like a shinobi, fight like a kunoichi. Don't drag a fight out. The point of practicing against clones is that you can strike with absolute killing intent without fear of harming anyone. Strike to kill as quickly as possible. Don't ignore strategy, but don't hesitate in the slightest to end a fight as quickly as possible. Honor in combat means a different thing to a ninja, Naruto explained. I'm at fault here too. We'll meet back here in 3 hours to discuss what we can do to improve. Dismissed for now. Tenten tugged his sleeve excitedly. Come on, let's go, she said, reminding Naruto of a hyperactive squirrel. Do you mind if I come along, Naruto-kun? Hinata asked sweetly. Tenten laughed. Don't worry about me, Hinata-chan, I'm too busy trying to break Niji in to go after Naruto too. Tenten teased. Hinata grinned. Of course, was Naruto's reply, and that was that. Well, if it isn't Naruto. Come to grace me with your presence, lad, the grizzled weaponsmith called out as Naruto entered the shop with Tenten and Hinata. Good to see you too, Two-san, Tenten huffed. The old man laughed. And who might this lovely young lady be? Welcome to my shop, Hyuga-san. I am Busho, and I'm sure you've met my daughter, Busho said, indicating the weapon's prodigy. Pleased to meet you, Hinata said politely, bowing. Naruto strode forward and gripped Busho's hand in a firm handshake. Sorry I haven't come by more often, Aji-san. But I think you'll like what I've got for you. Naruto said, untying Makai from his belt and presenting it to Busho. Tenten tells me you can shorten the blade without altering its properties. Busho nodded. This will benefit you, Naruto-kun. A little birdie tells me you enjoy fighting in close and are extremely fast. A Kodachi will give you and your particular style of fighting a much greater control of range, plus with the handle of a katana you'll get more power in each strike. How could having a shorter blade increase his range? Hinata asked curiously. Wouldn't having a longer weapon be better for fighting at a distance? Busho laughed. That's a good question. Actually, range isn't really the length of your weapon, it's how far away you can be from your opponent while still being able to hit him in one movement. So yes, a Yari or Nodachi would have a long range based on its length alone, but a weapon like a Kodachi can give its wielder an even greater range by allowing the wielder to control his opponent's range. He stroked his chin thoughtfully. Oftentimes, a fight between two skilled fighters is determined by how well one keeps out of the other's range while staying within his own. A larger weapon, despite having a long range, has longer blind spots and it's difficult to keep an opponent out of your own range while simultaneously entering his range. Watsuki, 4. Hinata nodded, simply absorbing the knowledge and filing it away for future use. So can you have it for me in a week? Naruto asked suddenly. Busho eyed him curiously. It'll be ready tomorrow. I just finished the last special order I had NQ, but what's the rush? He asked mildly. Naruto shook his head. No reason, just curious, he replied. Can't let anything slip about the mission. Busho nodded, though he looked at Naruto with no less suspicion. Alright then. Come by tomorrow morning and I'll have it ready for you. Sayonara, he called out as he took Makai back to his shop. Naruto left the shop after saying goodbye to Tenten, a noticeable lilt to his step. Are you hurt, Naruto-kun? Hinata asked as she followed Naruto through Konoha. He grinned. Not having Makai on my hip is gonna take some getting used to, he confessed, patting his left hip. It's only for a day, though, so it won't be that bad, Hinata reasoned, but Naruto shook his head. I think I'm gonna keep it on my back. Recently I've been noticing that it gets in the way of my more complicated taijutsu techniques. Naruto explained. Good thing Tsunade gave us all week to train. Hinata nodded. We made a pretty good team, she added, a small amount of pride entering her voice. Naruto smiled and placed an arm around her shoulders. Yeah, we did. And they walked as such until Naruto steered them into a local eatery. After a quick lunch of sukiyaki, they made their way back to the training grounds, where Haku and Kira were having an argument. Sasuke and Sakura looked on from the sidelines, and Naruto was quick to note that Sakura's hand was entwined with Sasuke's. As they approached, the point of the spat became clear. My bijou is so much better than yours, Kira proclaimed. Haku shook his head. On what grounds? The ability to keep its host animal as a pet? You've got nothing on me. Speed? Mine. Eyesight? Mine. What exactly are your special abilities again? And he cocked a hand to his ear. Kira glared. The agility to dodge any attack you dish out. Speed of my own. Haku laughed. Wanna have a little test, then? To see who's faster, more agile, nay, he poked her. Unless you're scared of losing. Kira laughed haughtily and turned to Naruto. Naruto-kun, how can we do this? She demanded. Naruto scratched his head. I dunno. Maybe we can see which one of you can hit me first, since I definitely beat both you in speed and agility. He offered. Dead silence enveloped the team as Naruto's suggestion hung in the air. Sakura stopped functioning altogether, and Sasuke turned away so the look of abject horror on his face wouldn't embarrass him. Kira recovered first. "You're joking, right? You're gonna get hurt, she admonished. Naruto smiled in return, tails popping out of his arms and twisting defensively around his body. "We'll see who gets hurt." "Yes." Haku howled. "Yes." Kira exulted as she finally made contact with Naruto. The couple looked at each other, then at Naruto. Both their attacks, Haku's ice-encrusted fist and Kira's Shudo, were making contact with Naruto, and by his estimation they had landed at the same time. "Perfect. You know what this means, right?" he asked them, as if prompting them for an answer. Haku scoffed. "This proves nothing, right?" he complained. Naruto shook his head. "No. What this proves is that a partnered pair of members of our team is capable of taking down someone who is more powerful than both of them combined." Naruto explained patiently. "Teamwork is key, especially when dealing with opponents of great skill like ourselves." Sakura clapped lightly, and Sasuke smiled his approval. Naruto smiled as well. Maybe by the end of the week, they can pull this off. For to survive without their leader, they would have to function effectively without Naruto. And they were suspicious already. Hinata would probably share with the rest of the team what she heard in Busho's weapon shop when he wasn't around. In fact, he wanted her to. It would make it easier on the rest of them. "I'll let things happen," Naruto reasoned. After all, only time would tell. "So, what do you think?" Busho exclaimed excitedly, unable to contain his pride and apprehension at Naruto's reaction any longer. The blonde tested the balance of each blade, positioning one on a finger on either hand and balancing them perfectly at where the hilt met the blade, weighing them with the air of a connoisseur. Naruto had begun the day without any hassle. Breakfast was served the next morning by Kira, who had insisted that as long as she was a guest in Naruto's home and village she would earn her keep. Ignoring the fact that the life-threatening missions they would surely be sent on, let alone the administrative work Kira would be doing soon, would pay for a small apartment and then some, Naruto wisely acquiesced. There was something about a woman's touch, he rationalized, that made food taste better. Absent at breakfast were any comments or questions from his teammates, Hinata in particular, about what she had heard in Busho's shop, which made Naruto wonder if she had told them at all. He made sure to give her a peck on the cheek when he greeted her that morning, and while she looked pleased he could tell she was still curious. The reason he was at the weapon shop so early in the morning and not training was waiting for him when he stepped outside. His Sharingan was instantly filled by large brown eyes literally shining with excitement. "Naruto-kun, Naruto-kun. It's done. Come quick. Now." Tenten had howled, grabbing Naruto's arm. Before the Hokage-to-be could even voice a protest, he was gone, and Haku, Kira, Sasuke, Hinata, and Sakura had to sprint to keep up with the spirited Kunoichi. So, they all watched as Naruto handled his new Kodachi, the dark steel seeming to reflect no light but rather give off light of their own. Naruto paused, and then flicked his hands. Two blades went spinning up into the air, and he grabbed the sheaths from Busho, who had held them while Naruto inspected his handiwork. As the Kodachi spun downwards, he held the sheaths parallel to the ground and focused intently on them. As Busho watched, his Sharingan flared briefly, and the occupants of the room felt a large amount of chakra flare. Just before the blades reached Naruto's eye level, he flipped the sheaths and caught the blades in them. And they promptly vanished. The small weapon shop shook with the deafening silence, broken by a quietly enraged Busho. "Boy, what did you do with my masterpiece?" he asked with a deadly quiet tone that promised swift yet painful death. "Sealed them in a pocket dimension," Naruto answered simply, and paradoxically. Sasuke nodded. "Like Tsukuyomi," he supplied. Naruto grinned. That was the basic idea. By scribing a certain line of seals onto the sheaths I can summon the swords at any moment by scribing a key seal in the air in front of me, he explained. Haku scratched his head. That sounds kinda overcomplicated. And really stupid and cliched, he commented finally. Naruto shrugged. Whatever's the most practical. One of the reasons I agreed to have my dad's blade reforged was because Mikai was, in all honesty, kinda bulky, which is why my dad was never remembered for using it, Naruto countered. Also, there was no way to reduce the size of the blade without eliminating the metal. Bushoji-san dash, and here Naruto was smacked by the grinning weaponsmith, said he wasn't comfortable with wasting metal like that, so when I suggested that he make the blade suitable for a Nido Ryu, or dual Kodachi style, he was okay with that. Haku opened his mouth to reply, but nothing came out as he couldn't really counter the technical argument Naruto presented. Before he could close it, Kira poked the roof of his mouth. Good way to catch flies, she laughed as Haku struggled to come to grips with the odd feeling only gained by having the roof of one's mouth touched by someone else suddenly and without warning. So we're gonna train now, right? Sakura pressed, ignoring Haku and Kira. Sasuke rolled his eyes. You sound a lot like me, he grunted. Sakura elbowed him, otherwise saying nothing. Naruto stroked his chin thoughtfully. Well, of course. Get to the training field now, he yelled. His team scattered instantly. Naruto turned to Busho and bowed low. I am in your debt, he said softly. Busho waved his hand, trying not to look proud and failing. Don't worry about it, son. Just use it well. Naruto grinned and formed a seal. There was a flash of yellow light, and he was gone. Tenten stared in awe. What was that? She whispered softly. Busho laughed uproariously and led her to the back of the shop. You ever heard of the yondaime in that academy of yours? Busho asked mockingly. Tenten nodded, then paled as realization struck her. Naruto knows that technique? She asked. Busho nodded. Tenten whistled. Konoha's in good hands, she decided. Naruto was waiting for them at the training field. Split up, he commanded when they got there. They made to stand with their partners, but Naruto shook his head. Individually. When they all stood alone, he nodded. Yesterday went better than I expected. We all worked with our partners as if we had been training with them our entire lives. So now we're going to prepare for a very likely situation. He formed the Kage Bunshin seal and formed 36 clones. It is very possible that we'll be sent on missions which put us up against more enemies than normal. That is, we may be ordered to hold the line against an army or something to that effect. Hinata went ever paler. Naruto-kun, those are suicide missions. Kira nodded in agreement. Naruto nodded. That's absolutely right, for any other team. But we're not exactly normal, right? If I were Hokage, I would be looking for an opportunity to prevent as many casualties as possible, and sending an overpowered team to do an impossible mission might be the best option. I honestly think we could survive such a mission. He paused. However, in situations like this, we probably would have to separate to maximize our effectiveness and cover more ground. So, and he sent his clones a signal. They all gathered in a group at one end of the training field. Naruto walked past his friends a ways until he gauged a far enough distance, then flashed through some seals, paying extra attention to his control for this volatile technique. Doton, Yomi Numa. Naruto declared. The ground erupted as the Hell Swamp formed, creating a line across the training field. Naruto nodded in approval. Defend the Hell Swamp. The clones will attack with the goal of getting past the Hell Swamp. Our goal is to keep them from getting there at all costs. Ready, and he formed the seal again, formed even more black-clad Naruto Bunshin. And the battle raged, Tsunade-sama? Shizen asked tentatively. Was it? The blonde asked groggily, getting up from her nap at her desk. You told me to remind you that we need Kira to help with the final paperwork today, remember? Shizen said exasperately. Tsunade nodded. Hi, Hi, well, let's go down to the training field and see how they're doing, she said, seeming to not hear what Shizen was saying. Helplessly, she trailed behind the Godame, resolved to her lot in life. When they got to the training field, they were greeted by a rather touching scene. What had happened was this: Naruto continuously made clones as his team proved rather adept at taking out ridiculous amounts of enemies with various jutsu. However, he made so many in so short a time that for the first time in months Naruto was extremely close to chakra depletion. Hinata with her Byakugan noticed it first, and Sasuke picked up on it when he had time to check on his teammates. The rest noticed when Naruto's foxtail jutsu dissipated and he began using taijutsu and his new kodachi to dispatch clones. But not even Naruto could hold it up forever. Pushed to the edge of the swamp, even his own clones began to wonder if this was okay, however Naruto refused to call them off. Giving a collective shrug, they pressed their attack, and Naruto, in his exhausted state, didn't notice that he had been maneuvered to the edge of the swamp. Blocking an attack from one clone and defending a sword strike from another, he was left open for a simple kick to the side, and over the edge of the rather deep and uninviting hell swamp. The minute he hit bottom, the clones dispelled as one. Immediately his teammates searched the area for Naruto, and when he couldn't be found they ran to the edge of the swamp. Sasuke cursed. "There's too much chakra in the swamp, I can't see him." Hinata nodded. "I have a better chance. I can avoid focusing on one point." Sasuke agreed and stepped away from the edge. Without warning, Hinata dived into the swamp, and after a few tense minutes she re-emerged with Naruto's 5 feet 7 inches and somewhat broad form tucked under one arm. Forming a human chain, Sakura, Kira, and Haku were able to pull Hinata out of the swamp. Together they dragged the couple over to a tree near the edge of the forest. Naruto took one look at Hinata, mumbled something that sounded like "arigato," and promptly fell asleep in Hinata's arms. She looked at him lovingly, then settled against the tree and fell asleep herself. Unsure of what to do, Sasuke took charge. Kira and he worked on dispelling the hell swamp, while Haku and Sakura checked Naruto and Hinata for any injury. Hinata was more or less unscathed, and Naruto was well on the mend. When everyone had finished their tasks, they were near collapse themselves. Taking a leaf out of the Rokuden Tobi's book, they propped themselves up against the tree for a rest themselves. It was to this scene that the Godame and her attendant arrived at. Torn between letting them rest and scolding them for so completely letting their guard down, Tsunade settled for simply walking over and poking her one-time apprentice in the shoulder. "Sleeping on the job, Sakura?" she asked sternly. She made to poke the kunoichi again, but her hand was caught by Sasuke's. "We're taking a break. We're exhausted. So we can move mountains and empty oceans with our strength, but right now we're all exhausted." So tired that Enai-sen was the first to pass out, Sasuke relayed tiredly as he closed his eyes once more, eyes that, Tsunade noted, were not red but black. Tsunade shrugged. His chakra should be back right now. What's his excuse? She pressed. Sasuke directed her gaze toward the blonde with a flick of his head. Naruto was curled up, his head resting on Hinata's lap while she stroked his hair absent-mindedly. "Would you get up?" he asked rhetorically. He sighed. "Naruto's little training exercise proved two things to us: that we can fight an army and win, but also only if they're not as strong as he. I'm really glad Akatsuki's gone," he finished as he rose from his seat next to Sakura, who immediately, albeit unconsciously, yanked on Sasuke's arm. "Come on everyone, get up," Shizen said happily. "Life is short, but the day's barely begun." She was right. The sun had only reached its zenith over the course of their training, but the prospect of being active for the rest of the day didn't make Sasuke feel any better. "Oh, it's Bachan," Naruto mentioned groggily as he rose from his nap. He flexed his arms and inhaled deeply, closing his eyes. When they reopened, the Sharingan gazed forth. "Sorry to interrupt your training, Naruto-kun, but I need to borrow Kira," Tsunade said with an evil grin. Naruto nodded. We were done for the day. Do you have any jounin with Doton chakra available? Naruto asked suddenly. Tsunade nodded. One of the ANBU just got back from a mission. Why do you ask? She demanded suspiciously. Naruto laughed. My nature used to be wind and water, but thanks to Kyubi's chakra I could only use wind and demonic natured. Now I can only use demonic chakra, but certain techniques are now amplified than if I could use other natures. Like Yomi Numa, for example. Tsunade glared. And let me guess, you had no idea that using destructive techniques like that one in a training field was prohibited? She asked angrily. Naruto shook his head. I knew. I needed it to serve a point though. And was proving that point worth almost losing you to that thing? Hinata asked sweetly, with just a touch of arsenic. Naruto nodded. Again, this was as much a test for me as it was for you. An army placed into a desperate situation where the only options are to fight or die will find in them the strength to overcome impossible odds and live. The choice of being beaten into the hell swamp just doesn't appeal, does it? So we fought, Naruto explained. Haku shook his head. What's the point of all this training if we're just gonna die before we actually fight anyone? Naruto met his eyes. This is for when the time comes that Tsunade steps down and I take over as the Rokudaime Hokage. What, you think we'd be a team forever? Naruto asked. When Haku got the point and looked down, Naruto grinned. Don't worry about it though. Make use of the time we have, nay? Haku returned the grin and nodded, leaning over to whisper in Kira's ear. Told ya. She jabbed him as she went to accompany Tsunade, but she was smiling. I'll meet you guys back at the house, okay? She called back. They all waved, and she left with the Godame. Naruto sighed. Gotta tell them tonight. Kira-chan. Have you seen Naruto-kun? Hinata asked one morning, exactly 1 week since they had returned from their mission escorting the grass caravan. The past few days had been filled with grueling training, but Hinata thought it was more than worth it. Naruto appeared more confident than ever with his chakra techniques and ninjutsu, throwing in kodachi work when he could. The rest of the team advanced well, with Sakura, Sasuke, and Hinata matching Kira, Haku, and Naruto for endurance, advancing far beyond what was expected of a shinobi or kunoichi. Why do you ask? Isn't he in his room? She replied, scrambling the eggs. They had been taking it in turns to cook breakfast every morning. Hinata blushed. Well, last night Naruto-kun asked me if I would and I said yes, so Kira stopped cooking and turned the stove off, turning slowly to face a blushing Hinata with an evil grin and a wink. You two sure were quiet, she replied evilly. Hinata blushed even more. No. I mean, well, we slept together, but we didn't sleep together, she shouted. Then she gaped and covered her mouth with her hands. Too late, as Haku and Sasuke meandered into the kitchen. You slept with Naruto? About time, Sasuke said nonchalantly as he took his seat. Haku grinned and gave Hinata the thumbs up. Damn it, we didn't have sex. Hinata yelled once more, just as Sakura staggered in, looking exhausted. She blinked and backed out of the room slowly. Hinata sighed. When I woke up, he was gone, she explained. No note, nothing. Sakura poked her head back in. Naruto's gone? She asked confusedly. Hinata nodded. Kira shrugged. Well, there's no use letting breakfast get cold. Eat up, and we'll go see the Hokage. Maybe she summoned him for something and he didn't want to wake you. He is the Rokudaime. If he didn't want to be seen or heard, it wouldn't have been a problem. Hinata nodded, still worried. Is this what Naruto-kun was talking about in Busho's shop? She wondered. Tsunade stared at the 5 jounin standing in front of her, wondering how exactly to break the news to them that Naruto had persuaded her to send him on an S-class mission to infiltrate Amigakure and return with information as to why they had attacked the caravan, and what the hell was going on in that war-torn village. So that's what she said. She was surprised by their reaction. No immediate anger or hurt expressions, just slow nods. The news must not have hit them yet, Tsunade reasoned, but when it does, wait a second, why didn't anyone tell us? Sakura asked, puzzled. Tsuanda glared, though her anger was not directed at them. Naruto didn't tell you, did he? She guessed. Correct. No, he didn't, Hinata breathed. She stared at the ceiling and appeared to be counting to 10. After she had finished, she redirected her gaze at Tsunade. When is he expected to return? She asked. Tsunade thought for a moment. Amigakure is about 5 days of travel for an army of shinobi. As quickly as they move, Naruto should be able to cover it in 2 or 3. After that, it's hard to say, but he should be back within the week, she deducted. Hinata nodded, and then turned to Sasuke and Sakura. We can keep up with 2 Jinchuriki moving as quickly as they can, can't we? Tsunade shook her head. Out of the question, there's no way I'll sanction you 5 dash, of course we can, Sasuke replied haughtily. After the training Naruto put all of us through, he went on, seemingly ignoring the Godame. Sakura nodded vigorously and pumped her fist. Hey! Pay attention! Tsunade shouted. Shizen burst into the room. What's going on? She said helplessly, clutching the perpetually depressed Tun-Tun. Kira grinned. If we leave today, we can get to Amigakure right before Naruto infiltrates it. That would leave him with good support if there was any way we could get to him while he was in. Tsunade motioned Shizen over and began to whisper in her ear. Well, let's get back to the Uzumaki complex and grab some gear. Thanks for the info, Tsunade-sama. Haku said. Without any warning, the remaining members of Naruto's team vanished. Not even smoke disguised their disappearance, they were simply gone. Tsunade's face contorted as approval, admiration, and frustration battled across her face. Before she knew it, Shizen had gone to complete the task she had outlined, and she only hoped it would be enough. They ran back to Naruto's home and gathered their equipment. They didn't speak to each other until they were hurtling through the trees towards Amigakure, a 2-day journey. Grim determination played their faces. We'll catch up with him, right? Hinata asked worriedly, breaking the silence. Sasuke shook his head. Things rarely work out that easily, and this is Naruto we're talking about. If I had to guess, I'd say he's outside the village right now, planning a way to get in undetected. Kira shook her head. But that's impossible. Even if you could summon a flying anime like the birds, it'd still take at least a day to get to Amigakure from Konoha, right? She asked exasperatedly. Haku grinned. I dunno. Like Sasuke said, this is Naruto we're talking about. He has the Sharingan and the Hiraishin no Jutsu. Yeah, but even Naruto doesn't have that kind of chakra, does he? Sakura asked. Hinata nodded. Whenever I looked at him with the Byakugan, it looked like he had more chakra than all of us and everyone in the village combined, she said. Sasuke nodded. I'd believe that. His chakra was massive when we first did the Chunin exam. I don't think Hinata is exaggerating that much, he added. Sakura glared at him. He'd still run out if he used the Sharingan all the way to Amigakure, she protested. And Hinata could check, couldn't she? Haku said mildly. If Sasuke hasn't seen any telltale chakra signs, maybe the Byakugan can. Kira skipped over to the path on which Haku was traveling through the trees and, in midair, pecked him on the cheek. He blushed, but before he could retaliate she was back in her own path. Hinata, meanwhile, was concentrating. She activated the Dojutsu and scanned the ground and trees in front of her. Nothing, she relayed to her teammates and friends. Nothing on the ground or the trees. Oh, for the love of the Kami, she said tiredly. What? What is it? Sakura asked excitedly. Hinata shook her head. There are some remnants of chakra in the sky 200 meters above us and about 500 meters behind us, Hinata said sadly. I can't see anything else, but it looks like Naruto-kun used his Sharingan to project seals into the air on the horizon and flash. She shook away tears that threatened to fall, unspoken words dying in her throat. Silence threatened to descend on them again. We'll still make it in time to do something, right? Kira asked softly. Right? No one replied. No one stopped moving, but no one replied. Naruto crouched down low, his back to the wall that surrounded Amigakure, and breathed in deeply. That was intense. I've never used that much chakra before, and this demonic stuff that I'm developing is powerful. It's like super dense normal chakra. Naruto thought tiredly, shaking his head clear. He had managed the trip from Konoha to Amigakure, normally a 2-day journey northwestward, in just under 5 hours. The sun had just peaked over the eastern horizon, and Naruto was ready to implement the next part of his plan, capture a shinobi leaving the village and assume their identity. There was only one problem: he had been squatting there for 15 minutes, and not a single person left through the gates. What the hell is with this village? Don't they take missions or anything? Naruto groaned aloud. He sat down with a plop onto the lushly vegetated ground. Sure is a lot of foliage here, he commented. As if to suggest the reason, a raindrop splattered on his head, and he groaned. Oh yeah, Amigakure, he sighed as it began to rain in earnest. Within minutes his black vest, shirt, and pants were soaked and his long hair and ponytail matted itself down. If his clothing weren't waterproof he would have been soaked. Suddenly, he snapped his fingers and formed 5 quick seals. He slashed at his finger with his nails and a small spurt of blood appeared. Kuchios no Jutsu, he said happily, and was enveloped in smoke. He was then immediately pressed against the rock he was sitting on by something larger than he expected. Geez, Gamakichi, what have you been eating? Naruto exclaimed. The toad he had summoned laughed. Didn't you ever wonder where summons go when we disappear, or where we're taken from when we get summoned? And nice to see you too, Gaki, the orange toad laughed. Naruto grumbled. Let me guess, a place where time passes differently than here, Gamakichi laughed. You'll be a great Hokage, Naruto-kun. So tell me, to what do I owe the pleasure? And I should know better by now than to ask, but you got any food? Naruto chuckled helplessly and dug through his hip pack, withdrawing some crackers. He opened the package and split it between the two of them. Gamakichi took his portion in one of his webbed hands in mock surprise. Thanks, he said, mouth full of cracker. He gave an epic swallow as Naruto cleared his throat. Gamakichi, what do you know about Amigakure? Did Gamabunta or anyone ever tell you anything? Naruto asked hopefully. Gamakichi went still and appeared to be thinking for a moment or several. Then, well, Amigakure has always pretty much kept to themselves. They're very secretive, more than the other villages. Their shinobi have never been seen outside their village except for the Third Great Shinobi War and the Chunin exams, Gamakichi explained. Wait a sec, Naruto interjected, what about the other shinobi wars? Gamakichi shrugged. No one talks about them much, apparently they weren't as bad as the last one. But I'm pretty sure that AIM never fought in them. Amigakure never really attended the Chunin exams until Hanzo the Salamander became the Amikage, he explained. Naruto glared. The more he heard about this salamander character, the more suspicious he became of him. And Pain said he killed him. Who was the Amikage now? Gamakichi, do you know anything about Hanzo? Last question, I promise, Naruto said seriously. The toad shuddered. The salamander is known to the toads. Jiraiya brought tales of the salamander with him when he trained with the toad hermits, stories of a shinobi with unequaled power and skill. Gamakichi scratched his chin. They say he was untouchable, a master of Suiton ninjutsu, a user of foreign taijutsu. He also is said to be immune to genjutsu, something Jiraiya attributed to the strange face mask he wears. More than that, I ain't got nothin', Gaki. Gamakichi said with a frown. You're not planning to fight him, are ya? Naruto shrugged. Not alone, I hope. Thanks a lot, Gamakichi, you can go. Gamakichi smiled. No prob, kid. And did you ever wonder where their guards were, before you tried to think of ways to get in? How about just walking in? And the toad poofed away, the smoke muted by the rain. Naruto sighed and got to his feet, turning to face Amigakure. Sure enough, there were no guards to be seen. For that matter, there were no guard towers, and the gate didn't appear to be manned. Without further ado, the blonde shinobi ran over to the gate and peeked into the village. Tall, steel structures dominated the village, if it could be called that. Naruto had never seen any place more densely built upon. In his awe, he leaned too heavily on the doors of the gate. Soundlessly, they swung forward. It took years of shinobi training to keep Naruto from yelling in surprise as he might have years ago, and he still wasn't able to keep in a small Hinata-esque meep. Gathering himself, he walked into the futuristic village, which showed every sign of being culturally and technologically advanced and no sign at all of being inhabited. He also had no sensation of being watched. His destination could only be the steel gray tower which loomed in the distance in what was obviously the center of the village, so as sneakily as he felt it necessary Naruto made his way to that landmark. The streets were eerily empty, intensifying the strange feeling that was growing in the pit of Naruto's stomach. He wasn't sure if anyone lived in this village, but he should have seen some sign of habitation at this point. But there was just nothing. Then, it happened without warning. Looking back, Naruto was sure there was something he missed, but his friends assured him that there was nothing he could have done. He was, after all, only human. For all his demonic powers and experience, yes, Naruto was only human, and after a swift and powerful jutsu focused at the tip of a shinobi's finger tapped the back of his neck, he collapsed to the ground, completely unconscious. As the remnants of the strongest shinobi in Konoha gathered around a small fire Sasuke had thrown together, Sakura pulled a map from her pack and stared at it intently. Hinata, leaving her rations uneaten for the bugs and rodentia of the forest, moved next to Sakura, who explained to Hinata where they were and where they were headed in the unfamiliar territory. Haku, meanwhile, sat quietly and snuck glances at Kira, who was eating and staring intently at her ration, as if it would leap out of her hands and make a break for the woods if she took her eyes off it. Finally, when he could stand it no longer, he stood up and sat next to Kira, startling her. Smack! Ouch! Haku yelped, wiping some stray crumbs from his face. Ah! I'm sorry, Kira exclaimed, reddening slightly. She watched as Haku cleaned himself up, then collected himself with a deep breath. Kira, you're going to return to Iwagakure soon, aren't you? He blurted out suddenly. Kira caught his eyes, which were staring intently at her, and averted her gaze to the ground. After a spell, she replied, It's my home, and they are kind to me there. But isn't Konoha just as good? Haku shot back. Kira looked at him, surprised, and he frowned. Sorry, I didn't mean it to come out like that. You just want to give me a reason to stay, Kira finished softly. Yeah, Haku admitted. Kami-sama be damned, but why her of all women? It could have been any red-haired, green-eyed Jinchuriki, but no, you fell for this one, he scolded himself. Then he froze as Kira leaned over and rested her head on his shoulder. You're a pretty good reason, stupid. Don't worry about it, this will work out. For now, let's get that dopey future Hokage of yours back, she said comfortingly, covering her mouth as she yawned. Haku grinned as the fire cackled as Sasuke came back from a habitual trip around their little camp. Maybe, just maybe, this would all work out and everything would be back to normal. When Naruto finally awoke, it was as if no time had passed. However, certain things had certainly changed. He was now chained to a wall. The seals covering those chains were specifically warded to contain demonic chakra. Naruto wondered briefly how he knew the seals could do that, since the slips of paper covering the chains were blank. That's to prevent that wonderful Sharingan of yours from altering those, and the many other seals, on those papers, a calm voice said, radiating serenity. Naruto shuddered involuntarily. He had never heard someone speak with more power laden behind every word. So you are, Naruto asked the darkness, his question hanging in the air. A moment passed, and two red eyes came into view, followed soon by a man. The most obvious feature of the man was definitely the freakishly huge breathing mask he wore, which covered his entire head in clear plastic and metal. The robes he wore concealed whatever else he was wearing, but the man's eyes shone brightly through the mask. I am Hanzo. You may have heard me called the Salamander. But to you, my names and aliases mean nothing, since you are soon to leave this world, the newly identified Hanzo stated calmly. Why? Obviously you need me for something, or else you would have killed me instead of knocking me out. Naruto yelled, straining at the chains and summoning as much chakra as he could. Surprisingly, his normally vast reserve seemed empty, and the attempt left him feeling mildly nauseated. No, Uzumaki-san, you'll warrant no villain's exposition from me. Suffice to say you have not long to live, so reconcile yourself with death in the time it takes for me to prepare myself, Hanzo replied as he turned his back to Naruto and strode away. Naruto stared at the retreating robed back, then lowered his gaze and began to think. One thing was clear, though, that separated itself from all his other thoughts. He had never before been so royally screwed, and with that unpleasant thought he drifted back into an exhausted state of semi-consciousness as he tried to come up with some sort of scheme. Tree hopping is essential for a shinobi or kunoichi, especially when performing missions inside the Fire Country, where forests are the prevalent landscape. Yumino Irika explained to his class of academy students as they followed him to a training area reserved for the academy and free from the destruction usually caused by Chunin, Jounin, and some of the more talented genin. As a result, the forest and its clearings were very beautiful, a prime example of untouched nature. Now, watch and look closely at my leg muscles and feet, but don't forget to pay attention to my torso. Keeping your upper body focused and relaxed will ensure that you keep your balance. Now, gather chakra, and jump from branch to branch. Don't worry about height, just keep going in a straight line and you won't have a problem, Irika called down as his students watched in awe as he leapt from branch to branch around the clearing. As soon as your foot touches the branch, push off by simply straightening your leg and giving your legs chakra. Step. Push. Conserve your chakra and keep a straight line. Don't worry about your teammates, they are on your line, just at different heights. Hinata-chan, slow down. If you keep going you'll be knocking on the gates. Kira called urgently. Hinata said, jolted from her thoughts and memories. Taking in her surroundings made her realize that she was maybe 50 meters from the forest's edge, after which the gate and wall to Amigakure loomed. Shouldn't it be raining or something? Sakura asked, puzzled. Sasuke shook his head. Even though they call it Amigakure, I remember Orochimaru saying something about there being wet seasons and every now and then a dry season. They're known not because it rains all the time, but because they have a completely different climate than the rest of the surrounding area. I think it might because they use so much Suiton Jutsu, Sasuke mused. Haku groaned. Can we just get inside please? Sakura looked at her companions and shrugged. Why not? How hard could it be? Not too far away, Naruto was awoken by the sound of a door opening and closing. Two red eyes peered out from the darkness. Time to die, Uzumaki Naruto-san. Hanzo approached Naruto calmly and deliberately, not seeming to care in the slightest that aside from himself the most powerful shinobi in the world was tethered before him. I thought pain killed you, Naruto said suddenly. He had been thinking for quite a while, and had remembered something from many months ago. The leader raspy, that's an interesting way to put it. My name is Pain, and I am from the village of Rain, Amigakure, once under the lordship of Hanzo, once under my lordship, though obviously no more. Naruto glared. You think to claim that Hanzo-sama was somehow defeated? Pain nodded. I killed him myself, by myself, he affirmed. It was difficult, let me assure you, but I did kill him, along with his family, friends, and supporters to ensure that my ascension was complete. Hanzo paused. Ah yes, that fellow from Akatsuki, what was his name again? Naruto stared, dumbfounded. Have you been paying any attention at all to the world around you? Where were you when Akatsuki essentially launched an attack that wiped out the villages of Grass and Konoha? Hanzo chuckled, and Naruto shivered, for there wasn't an ounce of mirth, mocking, or any other tone or emotion. It was an empty sound, cold and lifeless. I could care less what happened to any village other than my own. He stared at Naruto for a moment, then shrugged and brought his hands together. Well, this will all be over soon, so please keep quiet. There will be no pain, and when the process is completed you will know no more. Hanzo formed the ram seal, then deliberately began to form every seal in succession. Naruto watched, then realized something without even needing his Sharingan. He's using every seal that exists, and following some sort of order. It's a deliberate cycle, and he just repeats it over and over again. Why? Then he felt a presence. Dimly, he became aware of a large entity coming into being above his head, though he couldn't get a sense of size nor could he crane his head high enough to see. Then the world was rent before his eyes as the chakra in his body began to move. It was a hesitant tug at first, then without warning it seemed as though a tube had been inserted into Naruto and began to suck the chakra out of his body as painfully as possible. He had experienced pain before. He had fought with the most powerful shinobi in the world and lived to boast of victory. He had trained under the legendary Sannin Jiraiya, and had gotten stronger under one of the toughest teachers to mold chakra. Naruto screamed, long and loudly, with all the pain of a lifetime of abuse, reject, sadness, and loss. Hanzo raised one eyebrow, not one finger out of place nor one seal missed as he molded chakra. Strange, this technique was supposed to take the chakra from your body painlessly and efficiently. Screaming as he heard these words, yet more dread filled his mind. He tried to warn the legendary salamander. You idiot. The Kyubi and I have fused. He doesn't exist and there isn't any difference between my chakra and demonic chakra. My chakra is demonic. Naruto managed to force out in between yelps. The tug came again, and he let loose another blood-curdling scream. Hanzo nodded once, transferring smoothly from snake to rat to ox and onward seamlessly. Well, I guess that's an acceptable complication. More chakra will be taken then. This could work well, he mused, still leaving Naruto in the dark as to why such a powerful shinobi would need such chakra in the first place. The tug pulsed. And Naruto screamed in agony. Well, any bright ideas, Sasuke? Haku? Kira? Hinata? Hello? Sakura said with much exasperation, waving her hands towards the walls of Amigakure. We've been sitting here forever. Naruto might need us right now, she complained. Sasuke sighed. Sakura, even if we get in, how would we contact Naruto? And even then, by entering we might blow his cover. Naruto's here to spy and gather information without letting anyone know he's here, to a certain extent, not rape, loot, pillage, and burn the place to the ground, Sasuke explained, somewhat mockingly. Haku settled into a more comfortable position on the ground they were sitting and grinned. This is goin' to be good, he remarked excitedly. Kira jabbed his head, ignoring his yelp, and replied, well, why don't we infiltrate the village ourselves? I mean, it's a start, and even if we get caught it will draw attention to ourselves and away from anyone else. Or it could backfire and draw attention to everyone that entered the village recently, Sasuke challenged. Sakura huffed in response and stood up, brushing off her pink outfit. Well, there's no use standing around. Let's go. Sasuke, pretend to be my husband. Haku and Kira, make something up. Hinata, you're regressing to your old self. Say something, Sakura ordered as she grabbed Sasuke by the neck of his black shinobi outfit and dragged him away, too stunned and embarrassed as he was to resist. I like Sakura's idea. God knows what trouble Naruto gets into when I'm not around, Hinata said finally and marched off after Sakura. Haku and Kira looked at each other, shrugged helplessly, and stuffed their Konoha Hitai in their packs. As the black-clad Sasuke led the way to the gate, Sakura refused to wear proper stealth gear, citing some fashion reason in genjutsu, while Haku insisted on a set of his old robes that were tailored to his size. Hinata settled for a modified version of traditional Hyuga robes, to which Niji had to sneak past Hayashi, while Kira stuck with her red IWA outfit. They noticed the same thing Gamakichi did. Hey, where the hell is anyone? Sasuke asked aloud puzzledly. Haku grinned. Sweet, he said, strutting up to the gates and pushing them open. His friends watched as he walked in, then stopped abruptly. They followed him in, and likewise froze. The same skyscrapers and metallic buildings enveloped their view. This is a city, Kira said in awe. But where are the people? I don't hear anything. Not even dogs, or children, nothing, Hinata said. Byakugan, she muttered intensely, scanning the city for chakra signatures. There's not even developed chakra in this place. Where the hell is everyone? She began, then stopped suddenly. She stared intently for a moment, then her eyes widened. Kami-sama, she breathed. What? Do you see Naruto-kun? Kira asked urgently. Hinata nodded frantically. I recognize his chakra, but something's happening. Another massive chakra signature is right near him, and Naruto's chakra is moving or something, Hinata reported. That must be Hanzo the salamander. Sasuke shouted, forgetting that they were supposed to be spies. Shit. He cursed as he made to take off. Hinata moved likewise. Then Haku started. Wait, I can hear something. Hinata, lead on, but everyone keep their eyes and ears open. Hinata took off, the rest of the group falling in behind her as she wove between the buildings. But after a while, she stopped cold as a strange sound washed over their ears. Oh no, Sakura whispered, tears threatening to leak out. Damn him, Haku muttered. Hinata, move it. He shouted, and Hinata wasted no time sprinting off, even faster than before. As she ran behind Hinata, Kira felt something would hit her face, lingering as it was blown away by the air she was displacing, no more than a passing testimony to the pain Hinata was feeling. The sounds of Naruto's screams echoed louder and louder as they sped towards him. The pain went on as the tide does. Ebbing and flowing, it never really ends, but eventually low tide seems to be as a calm and relaxed ocean, as a high tide seems rough and tumultuous. Naruto screamed again as high tide came in for a spell, then breathed harshly as the pain ebbed for a moment, giving Naruto a chance to gauge the change that was happening to his body. Ripping the demonic chakra from a half-demon can have some interesting effects after all. As he took a toll on his body, Naruto became aware that, if anything, the demonic concentration of what chakra he had left was becoming more and more demonic, thickening and becoming denser. It was a gradual process, slow enough that his chakra coils were able to accommodate this change. Then he felt another tug, but instead of pain he felt something shift inside him. Something that was familiar to him, but that had happened so long ago he had nearly forgotten. Damn, Naruto muttered, twitching his new fox ears and sending his new ponytail of red-black hair to swaying. He reached around behind, sighing with audible relief as he felt no tail. He held up his new claws which were protruding from his fingers and flexed them experimentally, then slashed at the mirror. So fine were their edges that the mirror did not shatter, but instead was gouged with 4 lines. However, before he could consider the ramifications of what he thought was happening, the other tug overwhelmed his senses, and he knew no more, fainting as another roar of pain echoed around the chamber they were in. Hinata, you're speeding up again. Sakura complained from the rear. We've been running through this massive city for almost 10 minutes. You have to take it easier or we won't be in any condition to help Naruto when we get there. It stopped, she tossed back over her shoulder tersely, not relenting her pace at all. Sakura glared at her friend's back before her eyes widened. The screaming, she realized. Naruto, if that was him, is either unconscious, or we're almost there. Be ready to kill when we get there, damn it, Hinata began, then swore as she encountered the first obstacle. Before them was easily the tallest structure they had ever seen. Seemingly made entirely of metal, it stretched towards the sky to a height that made it seem, when one looked at the tip, as if it were perpetually falling towards the observer. Naruto-kun is inside? Kira guessed. Below it, Sakura guessed, Hinata nodding, as well as Sasuke. I can see him now. Something's happening to his chakra, Sasuke said worriedly. Let's go. Kira ran over to what appeared to be an entrance and threw open the door. A single figure was positioned in the center of a large chamber. He turned at the sound of Kira's entrance. Well, this is a surprise dash, he began to say, but his words were choked off by the slender hands of the Hyuga heiress, who had leapt up and over his head, turning in the air to land behind him, facing the way she came in. Without any words, emotion, or visible expression at all, she placed her left arm around his neck and her right fist on the side of his jaw. Pulling her right arm towards her head yielded a resounding snap, and the man's eyes glazed over. Hinata released the man's head and was already moving away before the dust flew up as his body crumpled to the floor. This way, she said monotonously as she threw open a door and descended what appeared to be stairs. Her friends hurried to catch up, stunned by the display of speed that Hinata had demonstrated. Did you see that, Sasuke-kun? Sakura asked quietly as they walked down the metallic steps. Sasuke nodded. Fast as Lee, maybe as fast as Naruto, he whispered, shuddering. I'd be hard-pressed to move more quickly. Then silence ruled, and revolt came only in the form of their feet on the stairs as they moved downwards. They descended for what seemed to be an eternity until they came upon another door. This too was flung open by Hinata, and they stepped into a dimly lit room. To Kira, Sakura, and Haku, the only presences were two, one taller man, his arms moving rhythmically, and another, chained and bound seemingly in empty air. To Sasuke and Hinata, it was a nightmare. Chakra flew about the room like a storm, all of it tinged with an eerie orange-red glow as it was sucked into the cavern above them, which looked as though it extended almost to ground level. Before they could act, the unbound man whom they assumed was Hanzo the salamander clapped his hands together, the sound echoing about the cavern. The chained body lurched towards the standing man, then fell limply, supported only by the chains that bound him, which in turn dissipated. Sasuke watched as the metal literally melted from having been saturated in so much chakra. Naruto's body fell the rest of the way to the ground with a soft plop. And so you have arrived to witness the end of something you neither comprehend nor will ever understand. Are you pleased? Does this give you some sort of closure? Were you close to this man? Hanzo said aloud, not turning to face them. As the chakra faded from the room, it began to brighten until the room's occupants became clear. Hanzo stood before them, facing Naruto, who was seemed to be chained to a surface, his head mask standing out amongst a simple cloak, bulges in which suggested the wearing of some sort of body armor. Naruto did not move at all. No one moved a muscle except Hanzo. He turned to face the newcomers, and Sasuke gasped when he saw the red eyes of the salamander. They were the same color as the Sharingan, and glowed, but lacked the familiar dotted iris of the fabled Dojutsu. In fact, it seemed that as Naruto's Sharingan transformed his entire eye into a silvery blue, Hanzo's eyes were orbs of pure red, a small black dot in the center. I would allow you to leave with his body, but it is of such use to me, so regretfully I must ask you to leave empty-handed, Hanzo continued. Kira snarled, the nails on her hands lengthening slightly and green chakra gathering around her palms as her green eyes began to widen. Sakura and Sasuke, meanwhile, had to move away from Haku as the air around him became frigid, blue-white chakra visibly swarming around his form, hair flapping behind him. Hinata bowed her head, then stared at Hanzo directly, Byakugan white meeting crimson red. You killed Naruto-kun, Hinata said softly. She started to walk towards Hanzo, and Sasuke and Kira fell in on her flanks, Haku and Sakura trailing behind, Naruto's lesson on partner fighting flooding back to them. Hanzo nodded. I assume then, very predictably, that you wish to kill me? Hinata nodded quietly, gathering chakra to her legs and hands. Sasuke, Kira, Haku, Sakura, I'll be fine on my own. You do your thing, and kill this man before he utters another syllable. Though she didn't turn around, she knew they were nodding. Now was not the time to grieve for the boy, now a man, who had done so much for them. Now was the time to end this man's life, and bring Naruto's body back to Konoha. Hanzo smiled for the first time, though he did not say a word as the group charged and he let go the cloak about his body. Kira moved with Sakura as they moved towards Hanzo. Don't worry about protecting me, do what you can with ninjutsu, and I'll follow your movements, Sakura said to Kira, who nodded and stopped. She brought her hands together and began to prepare a technique. Sasuke and Haku both were already several seals into their own ninjutsu. As they finished, their words reverberated throughout the cavern with power. Katan, Karyu Enden. Sueton, Suryuden. A dragon of ice that appeared more like quicksilver and a sheer wall of flame erupted from the shinobi's mouths and launched themselves towards Hanzo with impressive speed. Hinata had continued to walk straight towards Hanzo determinedly until she suddenly blurred from sight, only to reappear at his back. Before Hanzo's cloak hit the ground, she had struck the salamander in each kidney with a full-force juken blow. Hanzo stumbled forward, choking. Doton, Sokubaku. Kira intoned, and the ground of the cavern lurched up and solidified around Hanzo's legs, immobilizing him. Sakura reached him then, and with a vicious uppercut launched the body armor-clad salamander into the air. He flew forward into the path of the dragons, which impacted him in the chest. The resulting force from the opposite elements resulted in a blast of wind that knocked Hinata, who was right under the collision, back towards her teammates. She flipped with the force and landed facing Hanzo's direction in a crouch. They watched as his body returned to the earth with a thud, dust poofing up then slowly dissipating. Hanzo lay there for a moment, then got up slowly, stretching out his arms and legs. As the Konoha ninja watched in near horror, he patted his lower back with a rap. Those strikes you made really hurt, though I can't say exactly the same for those jutsu you tossed around, he said conversationally, with the air of one who is an expert judge of the topic he speaks of. Sasuke glared. You're an idiot if you think we're going to be intimidated or turn tail and run until you're scattered around this room. Hanzo smiled again. But that's the best part, he said softly. His hands blurred. Now, it's my turn, Sueton, Suryuden, he said softly, albeit ironically as the ice from Haku's jutsu melted and formed a larger dragon coiled around Hanzo. Then, it disappeared. Simultaneously, Sasuke and Haku leapt away as the space they formerly occupied was ripped apart by the dragon's impact. Hanzo was moving too, and he met the Uchiha and the Osprey Jinchuriki halfway, striking before they could with a palm to each of their faces. Fast as the blows were, they both managed to block, Sasuke with his Sharingan and Haku with his demonic speed enhancing his already swift reactions. They countered simultaneously, driving their fists towards Hanzo's abdomen, which were blocked as Hanzo brought his arms back to his chest, then swept them downward making in the air, deflecting the blows wide. In retaliation he chambered his right knee, pivoting his left foot as he did so, and shot 2 side kicks in rapid succession. Sasuke was able to move in time, but Haku could only cross his arms in an attempt to block. The kick shattered his outside arm and sent him flying backwards to be caught by Sakura, who healed him swiftly and joined the fight. Meanwhile, Kira finished her latest jutsu with the seal of the ram and whispered, Doton, Makai no Ishi. The rocks around her feet began to shift, then swiftly erupted into the air around her. As the technique took effect, she concentrated her molded chakra as the stone was compressed with enough pressure to literally transform the rock into magma with the heat. Pushing her palms forward, she launched the lava towards Hanzo, directing it with her chakra. At the same time, Sasuke had been repelled from Hanzo and had elected to use Katan, Housenkan no Jutsu, to shoot small fireballs at the salamander, who likewise was dodging attacks from Haku and now Sakura. Sasuke was able, with the Sharingan, to predict the three combatants' movements and place his attacks where they would hinder Hanzo and help Sakura and Haku the most. But the red-eyed man moved like the water and attacked with the swiftness of the fastest river, and it was all Sakura and Haku could do to strike, parry, and counter without getting hit. Hinata too joined the fray, slicing outside of Hanzo's range with her chakra beams. However, these were likewise avoided with unnatural grace. Then, sensing Kira's technique, the four leapt away from each other, Haku forming seals, Sakura racing to heal Sasuke's minor fracture from being repulsed earlier, and Hanzo forming a jutsu of his own. Muttering something which sounded to Haku's enhanced hearing like Kiri no Kabe, mist coalesced in the air around him and in front of him. As the magma hit, the mist instantly imploded around each fragment, simultaneously expanding and cooling the rock while halting its motion. Not even caring to ensure his technique's completion, he launched into another series of seals, ending with bird. Suiton, Daibakufu no Jutsu, he yelled, matching the force of the jutsu with the volume of his harsh and guttural voice. Out of the air, water was gathered into a massive whirl, which launched itself en masse at the Konoha ninja. It filled the cavern, leaving them with no choice but to gather their chakra in defense and attempt to block or resist the jutsu. Kira formed a quick seal and slammed her hands into the ground, raising a curved dome of dirt and stone around herself, while Haku and Sasuke formed seals of their own. Hinata poised herself, rotating her arms with such speed that they could no longer be individually distinguished, and Sakura rushed headlong at the cyclone of water, palms loaded with so much chakra that her hands were burning. As she met the water, she flung her palms forward and struck, releasing the chakra in an instant into the wall. However, such was the jutsu strength that only a small hole was opened, which proved to be insufficient, and Sakura was swept backwards, chakra-laden water eating at her body. Sasuke had enacted his own fire jutsu in an attempt to replicate Sakura's idea, but the flames were eaten away and Sasuke likewise was launched backwards. Haku attempted to escape into a mirror of ice, but it was instantly blasted into shards, which served only to shred him as they were caught up with him in the torrential storm of chakra and water. Of the five, only Kira and Hinata were unharmed. Without taking notice of their companions, they ran towards the salamander, who had summoned a small group of water clones, and together with the original in their midst they met the kunoichi. In a flurry of combat, Sakura, Sasuke, and Haku were all knocked unconscious by the clones, who fought as well as Naruto, but Sakura recovered quickly and healed the more serious chakra burns which covered her body, then ran to Sasuke and Haku's forms to heal their burns, and in Haku's case, bleeding wounds. Hinata attacked with all her speed, slicing at Hanzo with her personalized form of the Juken Hakusho, complementing Kira's alien taijutsu of quick, brutal strikes delivered in rapid succession. Yet Hanzo blocked and dodged, moving his larger mass seemingly effortlessly, and struck back with lightning-fast blows, his arms rippling like water. And finally, Hanzo's foot extended and caught Kira unbalanced, sinking into her stomach and winding her. She let out a small gasp and fell to the ground as Hanzo rechambered his leg and spun away from Hinata's strikes, which increased in their activity. She afforded a small bit of attention to the peripheral of her sight with the Byakugan and saw that Sakura was still healing Haku's wounds, while Sasuke was still lying flat, though his red Sharingan was open. Forgotten, Naruto hung. A ripple, unnoticed by the others, passed through his body as his muscles spasmed. After Hanzo dodged yet another combo of slashes, Hinata gave in to her frustration and gathered her chakra. "Kaden," she yelled, and at last Hanzo was forced away by the torrent of chakra which exploded from her petite form and swirled around her in a small form, extending further and further outward. Finally, it stopped, and Hanzo ceased his retreat 20 meters from Hinata, who was now labored in her breathing. Naruto twitched, his eyes fluttering. Were anyone watching him closely, they would have noticed flashes of red beneath his eyelids. Hanzo observed the Konoha ninja with just the slightest hint of regret. You know, it is a shame that such wonderful talent will be wasted on a cause for which there is no victory. Perhaps you shall reconsider. Turn away, go home to your village and live out the time you have left. A glaring Hinata snarled. Isn't that the point? Aren't you just going to? She paused, her sentence dying half-finished in the air before them. Having no clue as to Hanzo's intentions, she couldn't really accuse him of anything. In her field of vision, she caught sight of Naruto, the only man she had ever loved from the time she was a small child till now. Behind her, Sasuke groaned and struggled to his feet, supported by Haku. Hinata cursed softly, willing the tears that threatened to fall to stay where they were until this man was dead and scattered in pieces about the cavern. Maybe then, kaboom, suddenly, the ground shook them all to their knees as a massive explosion rocked the cavern. When her vision stopped blurring, Hinata's eyes immediately went to where Naruto's body lay still. Or rather, was. Now it thrashed and convulsed uncontrollably, and this time the tears did fall, pooling around Hinata's feet as Naruto's body was enveloped in reddish-orange chakra. A foul presence washed over them, putting a nasty taste in their mouths and making them sick to their stomachs. Behind Hinata, Sakura retched and emptied her rations onto the cavern floor. Shit, what the hell is this? I thought the Kyubi was gone for good. Sasuke asked, panting heavily as a wave of distorted evil washed over him. Kira stared, open-mouthed in horror, at Naruto's convulsing form. Then, she screamed and pointed. Look! He's alive, she shouted, for lack of a better phrase. Hinata slammed her white sleeve across her eyes, scratching away the tears and clearing her view. There. Naruto indeed had risen to his feet. Hunched over, his hands dangled limply, he bowed his head to his chest. Then, he straightened so quickly Hinata heard his spine snap as it formed a curve as Naruto threw his head back and screamed so loudly that it forced them to their knees once again as it destroyed their sense of balance with the sheer force of the compressed waves of air. The demonic chakra wrapped around Naruto's form, obscuring it like miniatured storms. A bulge formed on the top of his head, and his scream reached new levels of loudness as the top of his head sprouted fox ears. His hair exploded with growth and reached his waist, hanging about his face in shaggy locks. His eyes, already turned red, warped and formed the Sharingan, substituting red orbs for blue and a black pupil where once was silver. His hands lengthened, and his fingernails elongated into steely claws. To top off the transformation, 9 tails exploded from his lower back, seemingly formed of a combination of fur and chakra. He roared, and Hanzo leapt away as a small beam of concentrated chakra exploded from Naruto's mouth, exposing fangs as it loosed the blast, which impacted on the far wall and ripped it to shreds of rock and earth, shaking the cavern so that bits of shrapnel fell from the high ceiling. Hinata stared, oblivious to the debris falling about her, and on her, as Naruto's yell gradually ended, draining even he of breath to the point of suffocation. He pulled back, inhaling deeply, and roared once more, though this time the chakra was released in a wave of force that impacted the cavern's ceiling and shook larger chunks of rock away from the wall. Hinata! Move! Haku yelled as he picked up Kira, who had been rendered unconscious by Naruto's scream, and ran for the exit. We have to leave. Run! Sakura echoed, running after Sasuke. Hinata stared for just a second longer at Naruto, then turned and fled for the way they came in. The sounds of their labored breathing bounced off the walls of the narrow stair as they pounded up towards the surface, grim thoughts of Naruto's transformation. Wait a second, Hinata choked out as they reached the door to the lobby where they came in. But as the building shook again, Sasuke grabbed her hand and pulled her into the entrance where the corpse of the man they had killed as they came in still lay. Ignoring the smell which had already developed, they fled to the entrance of the tall metal structure they had just experienced hell in. Listen. This happened once. A long time ago. Hinata protested. The team stopped midway through the door, panting. What do you mean? Haku asked. Before we even met you and Haku-kun, after we found Sasuke, Naruto had overused his chakra and passed out. When he woke up in the hospital, he was changed, and it kind of looked like he does now. Only, it wasn't as destructive, and his Sharingan didn't stay red, Hinata explained in a rush. Haku stared. Then, Hinata, I didn't get a word of that, and I don't think repeating it will help. Could you slow down, and use smaller words? He pleaded, and despite the depravity of the situation, Sakura had to stifle a small giggle. It means that this has happened before, Kira moaned softly, shifting in Haku's arms. Kira. Don't move, let me heal you, Sakura cried, moving to place her hands on her head. Kira sighed happily as Sakura used her jutsu to restore the homeostasis to Kira's inner ear. Ah. Much better, I can stand now. Kira exclaimed as she twisted gracefully out of Haku's grasp and onto her 2 feet. Hinata, you look pensive, Sasuke observed quietly. What are you thinking? Hinata turned to Sasuke. The same thing you are. Apparently, last time Naruto transformed because of chakra depletion. When we got down to the cavern, it looked like he was dead. He even had that last bit of chakra that a ninja has right after they die. But what if that wasn't the last signature? What if it was a signal that the same thing was going to happen again? She said hurriedly. Sasuke shook his head. Last time, Naruto still had the Kyubi sealed within him, or at least a portion of the demon's chakra still resided in him. After that, Naruto got all the Kyubi's chakra, and his nature pretty much became demonic. No, that's not true, Sakura jumped in, wincing a little as the ground rumbled again. Naruto said that his nature was going to gradually transform, and until then he could still use wind nature chakra and demonic nature. His chakra was still human. Hinata frowned. So, she drawled. Then, she gasped. Shit. Grimacing, Sakura whined. Oh, now what? She complained. Sasuke put a hand on her shoulder and squeezed. Sakura turned to meet his eyes. What? What am I missing? Hinata and I couldn't see Naruto's chakra because Hanzo was sucking it out of him. But what that jutsu was designed for was probably regular old, human-natured chakra, unmolded and unchanged. But Naruto's chakra wasn't all human, it was about half demonic. And when I say half of Naruto's chakra, I mean maybe Kira's entire chakra or Haku's entire chakra. So the jutsu probably forcibly ripped Naruto's chakra from him, which was made even worse since demonic chakra is almost nothing like a human's, Sasuke said. Realization struck Kira. Naruto was left with nothing but demonic chakra, and it was supposed to be a gradual change. When he had nothing left, his body reacted last time. Now, she trailed off. Now it's much worse. Surprised, they all turned to Haku, who huffed and looked away. I'm not stupid, you know. And for about the umpteenth time that day, it seemed, the ground ripped apart. The perpetrator of this particular explosion was none other than the salamander himself, or, rather, his body, as it was hurled through what the Konoha Nin could only assume to be the ceiling and whatever was between that and the ground. Naruto came out of the hole he created, falling gently back to the ground and immediately stalking towards his opponent. Sasuke looked at the battling pair for a moment and grinned when Naruto was blown away by a Suiton jutsu. He turned to his friends. Shall we? He offered, as if setting up a fine exhibition for them to survey. Haku grinned and ran towards the fight, Sasuke trailing behind. Sakura, Kira, and Hinata nodded once and set off behind them, a green glow illuminating Sakura's palms. Naruto Hinata thought, we're here to help. Sasuke had believed that when Naruto had been blown away that it was a sign that he could use help. After all, nothing sucked more in the ninja world than standing on the sidelines watching 2 other ninja fight, presumably because the 2 fighting ninja were that much stronger and to jump in was hopeless, paramount to suicide. The others shared his sentiments, and ran over to Naruto, who was picking himself up off the ground and dusting himself off, no lasting injuries visible on his form. Naruto-kun. Are you Dash? Hinata began to ask, but was cut off immediately. Of course I am. What do you think you all are going to do in this fight? He asked with a rumble, his voice distorted and deeper than usual. Haku glared. Hey! Just 'cause you're really freaking weird looking right now doesn't mean you can dash, but he too was silenced by Naruto matching his glare with one better. The now red-haired Uzumaki turned away and stalked back towards the salamander. Idiot. Who would talk in the middle of a war? Naruto questioned aloud, flicking his tail as if to punctuate the statement. He paused, then, if you think you can help, do so, but things happen in war. Understand that you have a very good chance of dying here. Kira stared at the fox demon man that was now forming seals and shouting, Kuchios no Jutsu. Instantly a humongous cloud of smoke appeared, dissipating to reveal 4 toads as big as Naruto, all wearing samurai armor and wielding kodachi. They all planted their blades in the ground and began to focus. Naruto drew his own 2 blades seemingly from nowhere with an accompanying flash of red, then hurled himself towards Hanzo. When did he become such a jerk? Kira thought grouchily as she readied herself for a battle. Hinata stared as well, but snapped out of it and yelled, well, come on. Let's kill this bastard and get this over with. Running towards the salamander, who was currently engaged in combat with Naruto and keeping up remarkably well, she focused the chakra in her palms and shot it at Hanzo in repeated bursts, maximizing the diameter of her beams as much as she could without burning holes through her palms. The first beam caught Hanzo by surprise, and belatedly she wished she had taken more careful aim. Instead of a death shot she hit his lung, and while the damage was severe the salamander was still able to keep up with Naruto and dodge her subsequent shots and, when that failed, slices. Cursing, Hinata abandoned her ranged attack and went into a Juken rush, complementing Naruto's attacks as best she could, for though they had trained for this moment Naruto was not attacking in any familiar way, and it was all Hinata could do to take advantage of the openings he left in his wake and cover him when he left himself vulnerable. Sakura joined Naruto as well, and while she was used to fighting back-to-back with Kira she was also able to add her blows to the mix. Since her punches had enhanced strength, she had to be extra careful in her movements and plan further ahead than Naruto, who could predict movements with his experience and Sharingan but was seemingly relying on sheer reaction speed, and Hinata, whose Juken allowed her more time to react after blows. Suddenly, Naruto broke off his attack and leapt away from Hanzo. Sakura and Hinata, confused, also leapt away. As they did so, they saw the 4 toads had moved to surround Hanzo. They slammed their blades into the ground again, then pounded them with the flat of their paws. The impact shuddered the ground and split it apart, sending debris flying at Hanzo, leaving no room for escape. His cry was muffled by the moving earth, but it soon became apparent what he had shouted when a small tsunami erupted around the epicenter of the rock storm, blocking all the rocks. Another surge of chakra was felt by Naruto, and he leapt aside as another jutsu went off and the tsunami exploded, sending concentrated spikes of water at random as well as the rocks that the toads had fired off. The toads had no chance, so Naruto simply allowed them to dispel themselves, releasing the mental hold he had on their existence in this world. Rushing at the salamander, he drew forth his dual kodachi and went into a flurry of motion, slashing and swiping at the fluid Hanzo who, as he dodged, rushed through seals and planted his palms into the ground. Without even waiting to see the effects of the jutsu, Naruto leapt away again as water exploded from the ground in spiraling spikes. As the water turned outwards, Naruto felt a huge surge of chakra sweep around him and impact the tendrils of water, freezing them and turning them to ice. Immediately afterward a powerful Housenkan no Jutsu, Phoenix Flame, crashed into the ice, causing it to explode in shards and inflicting minor wounds on Hanzo. He growled, but Sasuke and Haku weren't letting up. They formed seal after seal, launching jutsu after jutsu at the salamander but were unable to pierce his defenses, even when Kira joined the fray. Sakura and Hinata ran down to where Naruto watched the storm of elemental chakra calmly, demonic chakra swirling about his person. When Hinata and Sakura reached him, he reached out and placed a clawed hand on each of their heads. Immediately, demonic chakra scorched their bodies. Ignoring their winces, Naruto launched himself at Hanzo. The two girls watched as Naruto waded safely into the fray, unaffected by the storm of jutsu surrounding Hanzo, who had surrounded himself in what appeared to be a shield of chakra-soaked water which cloaked his being like a small aura. He began to exchange blows with Naruto, the blonde sweeping knife edge and open palm strikes met with unyielding parries and counterattacks. Sakura shrugged and ran after Naruto, Hinata following her, both trying to ignore the pain and the fact that Naruto's cloak of the fox was eating away at their chakra. The fight became a war of attrition, with Sasuke, Haku, and Kira struggling to bring down Hanzo's chakra reserves and Sakura, Hinata, and Naruto attempting to break the salamander's concentration. But for all their efforts, the man was too well prepared. He had stolen the vast majority of Naruto's chakra and would be able to fuel the water shield almost indefinitely. Furthermore, his speed and strength were unlike anything the ninja had ever seen, and his taijutsu was unfamiliar to all of them. Finally, Hanzo caught Sakura unawares. Catching her fist as it hurtled towards his solar plexus, he redirected to his left. Immediately, with the same hand he used to deflect her blow, he struck her under her chin, the force of his counter driving her off her feet and directly at the steady stream of fire and ice mixed with stone projectiles. The jutsu collided with the pink-haired Kunoichi, draining her of her chakra and ending the cloak of the fox Naruto had transferred to her. When Hinata saw this, she broke off her attack and scrambled to get Sakura off the battlefield. Naruto quickly formed a quick seal, and demonic Kyubi Kage Bunshins formed around him and rushed Hanzo. Distracted by the overpowered shadow clones, he couldn't stop Naruto from rushing to Sakura's aid as well, nor do anything about the three ninjutsu users who halted their attacks as well. Sasuke punched Naruto lightly, who growled in response, as they hunched over Sakura's still form. "Why haven't you used the Hiraishin no Jutsu with your Sharingan yet?" he complained. "This would have been over a long time ago." Naruto glared at him. "Don't be stupid, Uchiha. If I could have, I would have. But no matter how hard I try, I can't get the chakra to flow through these eyes, nor activate the seal I placed on his face mask the minute I saw him in the cavern." Haku blinked. "Wait, never mind. Does any part of the Sharingan work?" "Of course. I can see everything I normally could, but the seals are gone. I can't use them anymore. Not only that, but I didn't bring any of the special kunai with me," Naruto said quietly. He stretched out as Hanzo watched them passively, seemingly not caring whether they were attacking or planning or simply shooting the breeze. Naruto shrugged, an idea forming in his head. "Well, there is one thing left. We've tried just about everything, but not this. I think," and he formed the seal for Kage Bunshin no Jutsu. Sakura saw what he was doing and felt her stomach drop out. "Naruto, get serious," she exploded. "We don't have time for your stupid unpredictable shit right now." Sasuke laughed as dozens of demonic Narutos came into being and launched themselves at Hanzo who, like so many before him, took the bait and began to eliminate them using various area-affecting ninjutsu that are called for in many vs. 1 situations. Naruto chuckled. "Go back to the beginning." Sakura just stared at him dumbly, jumping when Kira placed her hand on her shoulder. "If it helps, we're all kind of lost here too," she offered, her tone conveying the sincerity of her confusion. Gasping, Hinata giggled. "I see now. Do you really think it will work, Naruto-kun?" The demonic blonde laughed once and readied himself. Then he turned and looked her in the eye and said smugly, "No." And he flew towards the crowd of massacred Bunshins, adding more to the fray suddenly. Haku perked up and stared in the general direction of the entrance to Amigakure. "Someone's coming. Actually, a lot of someones are coming. Konoha. Konoha is here," Sakura exclaimed. "Should we go meet them?" "Hell no," Sasuke snorted. "They'll find us easily, I'm guessing, judging by the racket Naruto is making." And indeed, large explosions were plentiful in the battle now taking place invisible to the team of elite ninja. Smoke obscured their vision and Sasuke and Hinata were unable to see through the torrent of chakra. Suddenly, an explosion unlike any before it rocked the ground and drove the smoke away to reveal Naruto standing at a deadlock with Hanzo, his Kodachi held in the salamander's bloody grip, neither able to overpower the other. "It's over, child," Hanzo said, slightly out of breath. "So this is how it ends when you finally face someone with as much chakra as yourself," he taunted. With a heave he threw his weight backwards, rolling onto his back and kicking up at Naruto, who was too stunned to do anything other than hold on to his blades and fall forward with him. Naruto flew over Hanzo's head, and as he reached the apex of the motion Hanzo yanked, pulling Naruto down and himself up, driving his feet again into Naruto's stomach. Hanzo twisted in midair, using Naruto as a counterbalance to get around to Naruto's back. He kicked once more, this time at the ground, and the blonde hit the debris below with a deafening slam, coughing up a large quantity of blood. As Hanzo hit the ground in a crouch, Naruto grinned at him. "You missed one." And the blonde's form was engulfed in a burst of smoke. Cursing, Hanzo whipped around and delivered a vicious uppercut to Naruto, who had exploded from the ground behind him, Rasengan in hand. Reeling, the Jinchuriki coughed up blood once more and exploded in a poof of smoke. The salamander pivoted on his foot, driving his elbow into the blonde mat of hair that was flying up at him from the ground again. Such was the force of his blow that the skull cracked beneath Hanzo's strike. As Naruto's head was driven back into the ground by the blow, his form melted away, and he exploded in a poof of smoke. And resignation was the last thing Hanzo felt as Naruto, who had never disappeared but merely released a henge of himself that was a small modification of his current demonic appearance, drew forth the 9 tails with his chakra and thrust them into the salamander's back. Naruto howled with victory, and the tails pulsed as red fire raced through them and incinerated the body till nothing remained. As the salamander died, he felt no pain. He also detected a small trace of acceptance at his fate, as if he was paying the fiery price for tampering with demons. Such is the will of fire. And then he knew no more. "You know, Naruto, we could have learned a lot from his mind," a voice said reprovingly. Almost as one, the 6 friends turned to see Tsunade and an impressively large force of shinobi and kunoichi behind her. "True. What's with the backup?" Naruto rumbled, ignoring Sakura's elbow to his ribs and the accompanying nag, "Be nice." Tsunade stared at him, noticing the change in his voice from oddly deep to somewhat normal. "Well, when I told them that the Rokudaime was in trouble, they couldn't wait to hit the road." She grinned. "You'll do well, kid." Then she took in his appearance. "But we'll have to do something about that hair." "And when was the last time you cut your nails?" Naruto grinned as he turned to his companions. "Well, shall we?" he said grandly, gesturing toward Tsunade and Kakashi, who had poked his head out from the crowd with a customary "yo." Kira, Haku, and Hinata giggled at Naruto's mockery of Sasuke, and even Sakura had to stifle a grin. Sasuke just smirked and strode ahead, Naruto caught up, and they pounded fists. "So," Naruto asked Tsunade, sidling up to her, Hinata in tow. The second the danger had passed, she had latched onto his side and had refused to let him out of her sight on their trek back to Konohagakure. "Naruto-kun, I can't keep you out of trouble when you're out of my sight, but I can't even keep up with you when you're in my sight, and that's saying something since I can see everywhere at once." "It's not fair," she complained, latching onto his arm. And that was that. "So, what kept you, Tsunade?" "I figured you were hot on my heels, but I was expecting Konoha's best to make it here a bit sooner," Naruto drawled, flicking his foxy ears absent-mindedly. "I'm sure you found it odd that Amigakure was empty," she retorted. Sakura snorted. "You can't be serious." The Godame looked at her as a cow looks at an oncoming train. Sakura paled. "You're joking. The entire village? You fought an entire village?" Tsunade looked up at the sky. "They had been placed under some sort of genjutsu. We estimate that we had to kill at least a third of them before Itachi figured out a way to dispel it." Naruto looked at the ground. Where are they now? Do they know that Hanzo is dead? His ears flicked again, this time of their own accord. Yes. I figured that once your team caught up with you, you would be able to make short work of a single shinobi. I told them to bury their dead and return to Amigakure with some escorts. They're a broken people. I wonder if they will recover from these losses, Tsunade said speculatively. She watched Naruto's ears. And do you ever plan on explaining your appearance, or are you just going to leave your superior in the dark? Naruto just laughed. The bastard salamander took all of my remaining human chakra. All of my chakra is demonic now, perpetually natured that way. He raised an imaginary glass. Here's to hoping it'll change back. Wait a sec, why perpetually? Won't you regenerate human chakra and balance out the other stuff? Haku protested. But Naruto shook his head. I don't generate human chakra. Ever since the Kyubi and I fused, I've been somewhere between demon and man. Now that my chakra is demonic, he left his statement hanging. We'll run some tests. I'm sure the doctors and researchers would love to get their hands on you, Tsunade replied. Naruto shivered involuntarily. Meanwhile, Sasuke was interrogating Itachi. You figured out a counter to that mind genjutsu? He pestered. Itachi sighed. Yes. How? The younger Uchiha pressed. Itachi glanced out of the corner of his eye into Sasuke's. What did he see? Eagerness? Curiosity? He felt his own enthusiasm for a new jutsu start to stir. Well, it was actually pretty simple. Once I figured out how the chakra lattices were formed inside the affected brain, it was a simple matter to, from a distance away, amongst the throng of shinobi and kunoichi marching towards Konoha, Sakura watched the brothers discuss the finer points of genjutsu, smiling softly as the familiar forests of Konoha surrounded them. A collective cheer was roused among the soldiers of Konoha, ragged at first, but it gained momentum as it spread through the crowd like a wildfire. It's good to be home. The doctor straightened and turned away from Naruto on the operating table and watched as readouts spilled from the machine, nodding excitedly. Well, Doc? Naruto called from his prone position. What's the deal? Hush, Naruto, let the kind lady work, Hinata admonished Softy, running a hand through his spiky crimson hair, careful to avoid his new pointed ears. That will take some time getting used to, she thought absent-mindedly. The doctor turned about suddenly. I have wonderful news, she practically yelled. Naruto cringed, but Hinata simply grinned. So he's going to be fine? She asked hopefully. The medical kunoichi nodded vigorously. In fact, he looks to be in better shape than ever. From what you told me, the experience must have been extremely painful, but in the long run I think you'll benefit from it. And the ears are just adorable, she exclaimed, oblivious to Hinata grumbling under her breath or Naruto's blush and involuntary jerk towards his ears. Speaking of which, Naruto began hesitantly, begging the question. However, the doctor sobered immediately. Well, as to that, Naruto-san, I'm afraid there is nothing we can do to reverse the process. The only cases we have as a precedent to yours are failed transformation jutsu where the chakra was molded incorrectly or the jutsu was held for too long, resulting in permanent damage. In every case, the change was irreversible by any means. When you get injured, your demonic chakra regenerates the damage instantly, but I feel that that same chakra was what's responsible for this change, the doctor explained. At Naruto's troubled look, she smiled. But that shouldn't be a problem for the Rokudaime Hokage, nay? Feel better, Naruto-san, you'll be discharged from the hospital this afternoon. And the doctor fled from the room. Naruto stared after her, a warm feeling spreading through his limbs. Who would have thought that after all those years of being rejected as a demon monster that the appearance of a foxboy would be nothing to worry about, even adorable, he thought to himself. Then the neurons in his brain were overloaded for a few seconds. When Hinata pulled away, her lips tugging gently on his, he looked into her eyes to see overwhelming relief, as well as a few tears. It's over, isn't it, Naruto-kun? Is all this sadness finally over? Can we go back to being normal ninja? She pleaded. Naruto laughed, pulling her onto the operating table with him so that she could bury a sobbing Hyuga visage into his black vest more comfortably. Hinata-chan, I don't think we were ever normal ninja. But yeah, he affirmed as he rubbed her back gently. It's over, as her sobs quieted and she fell asleep. Seeing this, he let his head fall back on the table and contemplated the answer to life, the universe, and everything. Outside, the doctor watched them with sympathetic eyes, then turned to the group of people standing outside. He's resting now, so you'll have to come back another time. That's fine. We'll just wait here until he wakes up then, a voice yelled out, followed by sounds of a mild scuffle and several s. The doctor just laughed and turned to move down the hall to tend to the other injuries from the battle with Amigakure. When Naruto awoke, he was aware of a curious sensation. He realized that it was the prickly feeling one gets from being watched. Wondering why his excessively heightened senses weren't amplifying this sensation to its normally ridiculous degree, he opened his eyes. He almost fell off the bed with shock when he realized how many people were in the room with him. Then he did fall off the bed when he realized that he was in a bed and not the hospital operating table. Wahoo why, lemons, he spluttered in supreme confusion. He shook his head and collected his wits about him. Hinata, he managed to squeeze out. He rubbed his eyes, but found that his hands were being pushed away by softer, slimmer ones and his eyes were dabbed at with the most wondrously cool cloth it had ever been his pleasure to come into contact with. He sighed with contentedness at the little things in life, accepting his luck when the cloth was taken away. He opened his eyes once more, cleared of the prejudices of sleep, and took his surroundings, extending his shinobi senses and employing his Sharingan, which he realized was activated once again. He was in his home, that much was certain from the various traps set with the Sharingan which gave off very distinct chakra signatures. Turning his attention back into his room, he took stock of its contents. Hinata was kneeling in front of him, watching his reactions and observations fondly, as a mother watches her child at play. He smiled at her as his gaze lingered on her pearl eyes, then continued his journey around the room. Kira and Haku watched him, seeming to only barely control fits of laughter at his confusion. As his gaze drifted to them, he noticed that they stood a little too close together. Seeing that their hands were entwined, he nodded to himself with a small grin and moved on. Sasuke looked him right in the eye, Sharingan meeting Sharingan once more. A world of feeling and understanding passed between the two, the type of silent communication they shared known only to those who have suffered immeasurable hardship together and strode through it confidently despite the challenges. They nodded to each other, nothing more than a slight inclination of the head. Naruto watched as Sakura rolled her emerald eyes at seeing this little exchange, though she was able to recognize its significance. She tightened her arm as it wound through the younger prodigal Uchihas. Naruto grinned cheekily at her, bringing to Sakura's mind a small child who has just played a practical joke and got away scot-free with it. Without being able to help herself, she smiled in return. Over the heads of his friends, Naruto saw several other faces. Tenten stood by her father, Busho the weaponsmith, and waved when he noticed her. Busho simply raised his eyebrows and looked at him questioningly, to which Naruto nodded with a huge smile in affirmation of the successful use of the Kodachi. Satisfied, Busho allowed a large grin to encompass his face. The final pair of eyes he encountered didn't exist, as one of the eyes was hidden by a mask. Kakashi and Irika, his teachers, watched as Naruto stared at them dumbly. Kakashi's eye tightened in a smile, and Naruto could almost hear it before the white fan said it, "Yo." Naruto shook his head, fighting a huge smirk but eventually giving in. He rose to his feet and mingled with his friends who had come to make sure he was going to wake up. A yell of indignation rose from the fox-like shinobi when he found out he had slept for 2 whole days. "We had to move you, see. It was really troublesome, but the Hokage insisted that we take care of it, Shikamaru drawled as he pounded Naruto's fist, smiling ever so slightly. Yeah, but then Chuji just used his multi-size jutsu. Ino exclaimed. It was pretty easy after that, she added, tossing her hair and winking at the massive Akimichi, who tossed Naruto a double thumbs up and a grin, which was matched. Naruto, another voice called out. Once again I am impressed with your youthful vigor. Naruto braced himself for a multiple skeletal fracture, and was thus surprised when Lee hugged him gently, then danced away. Seeing Naruto's puzzled look, Lee elaborated, Gai-sensei insisted that I be gentle with you, Naruto-kun, until you are well again and can safely receive a beating in our rematch. Naruto laughed. You're on, fuzzy brows. You're on. Lee grinned, and then he was gone. As Naruto talked and laughed with his friends and, truly, his family, two absences struck him. The first and most obvious was Inuzuka Kiba, who had fallen in battle against the Akatsuki during their invasion of Konoha. While his loss hurt, Naruto knew that Kiba would not have wanted him nor Akamaru to be remembered in sadness, and so, with a mental wink to his old friend, Naruto moved on. But when everyone had left promising to meet him at Ichiraku's for lunch the next day, Naruto sat next to Hinata on his low bed in the house and leaned his head on her shoulder. I miss him, he said after a moment's silence. Hinata thought for a moment. You mean Jiraiya? She asked softly, and felt him nod in confirmation. Did you ever read his letter? She asked. When she felt him stiffen, she thought she had said something wrong, but then Naruto moved away from her, kissed her fiercely then, taking advantage of her momentary daze, ran over to his wardrobe full of shinobi outfits and rummaged around until he withdrew a scrap of paper and a pin. Before Hinata could stop him, he had pricked his finger and was writing a seal in blood, focusing his chakra. You sealed it with a blood seal? Hinata asked when she realized what he was doing. He shook his head. I sealed it with the Sharingan, but since I can't write seals with it anymore, he paused as he finished the seal, which began to glow, illuminating the kanji for secret. The only way to release the seal is with blood. Think of it kind of like a summoning. Hinata nodded as the piece of paper disappeared in a small puff of smoke, the edges of a scroll visible. As Naruto began to open it, she rose to leave. But when she tried to move away, she found that she couldn't, as her hand had been taken prisoner by Naruto's. With wordless consent, she sat back down on the bed and rested her chin on her love's shoulder as he began to read. Uzumaki Naruto, 3 months passed in relative calm since Konoha's skirmish with Amigakure. To the public was released a report about how Konoha had been threatened with war by the rain, and it was only with the brilliant subterfuge of Naruto's team that Konoha had been able to muster their forces and counterattack, though behind closed doors everyone had shared a good laugh about how haphazard the operation was. When they returned from Amigakure, Kira was called back to assist Tsunade with the IWA Konoha alliance. After a few more weeks of pleasant negotiation with the busty Hokage, Kira realized that it was time for her to return to Iwagakure and bring a copy of the treaty for her Kage to sign. I'm writing this to you as we near the end of your training mission, and looking back on that loudmouth brat you were a few years ago, I can honestly say, nothing's changed. Huh. In fact, Naruto, you've become more like your father than I imagined you would. You'll have to beat the ladies away with a stick when you get home again. When she emerged from the Hokage's office after their longest meeting to date, Haku was waiting for her. Haku-kun, she yelled happily, running to the long-haired Jinchuriki. What are you doing here? Didn't you guys just leave on an A-rank mission? She asked, confused with his presence. Haku grinned. Naruto told me to stay behind. Something about your girl, sending her off properly, that kinda stuff. I missed most of it. He was speaking pretty quickly. More like talking at me. Kira giggled and slipped her arm through his, blushing slightly. Well, it's too late to leave for Iwagakure today, so I guess I'll have to wait until tomorrow morning, nay? Haku grinned. You know, Kira-chan, he said, gazing off into the sky as they exited the Hokage's mansion. There's this great ramen place I keep hearing about. Real quality stuff, I'm told. A great place for a date, if you get my meaning, he added, turning to look her in the eye, brown meeting green. Green looked away briefly, then disappeared altogether, covered by eyelids and the muscles behind a powerful smile. Sounds like fun, Kira agreed. Speaking of which, don't think just because you're back in Konoha you'll be able to relax. If you thought I was tough, wait till you really start working with that old hag of a Hokage. You'll have to bust your ass harder than ever, kid, but I think you of all people won't have a problem with that. When they arrived at the legendary ramen stand, they came upon a heart-wrenching display of emotion. An old man in a chef's head was bawling his eyes out on the counter, his face buried in his folded arms while a young woman desperately tried to comfort him. Look, I'm sure he hasn't forgotten about Ichiraku's, he'll be back. Naruto-kun is a very busy man now, and he's got a lot of responsibility the woman, who looked to be about 18 was saying. When he's Hokage, will he come back? Will he? The old man raged, pounding the counter. Hey, Ji-san. You questioning Naruto's loyalty to ramen? Haku yelled. The old man froze, turning to face this newcomer. You must be Naruto's teammates, I remember you. Haku, was it? The young woman exclaimed happily, distress vanishing in an instant. My name is Iam, welcome to Ichiraku Ramen. The old man snapped upright as well, all trace of depression gone. Yash. Until Naruto returns, I shall flex my ramen-making muscles on you. Kira and Haku swallowed uneasily. So much for a pleasant date. I'm not actually sure why I'm writing this, Naruto. Maybe I feel like I need to, maybe I feel like there's still so much more to tell you. All I know is, I have a feeling in my gut that the end of the legendary Sannin is coming. Orochimaru sealed his own fate the minute he infected Sasuke with that madness. So when that day comes and I give my life for Konoha, I want to make sure you understand why we do what we do. They left the ramen stand. Or, more accurately, they waddled out from under the hanging curtains. Damn that old bastard, Kira muttered, her self-esteem decreasing exponentially. If I gain weight from this I will come back and kill that man and raze that ramen stand to the ground. And when Naruto-kun finds out and kills me, I will die happy. Haku laughed until it hurt, which happened pretty quickly on account of his bulging stomach. I guess I should hope you do gain some weight then, huh? He quipped, intending it as a joke. However, Kira stopped dead in her tracks. Immediately Haku whipped around and grabbed her head in his hands. Kira-chan, listen to me. Listen, he yelled. Shocked, Kira looked up at him, tears hanging unshed in her eyes. We can't keep running away from this. You're going back to Iwagakure, possibly forever. I love you, and I'm staying here in Konohagakure where I belong. What are we going to do? He said calmly, saying even the last thought as a statement. Why do you want to stay here so much? Kira blurted out, then slapped her hands over her mouth, horrified. I'm sorry, she mumbled. But instead of reacting angrily, Haku just laughed softly. Why do you want to go back to Rock so badly? He retorted. Kira thought for a moment. After a few minutes, they came to a wordless conclusion and headed back for Naruto's house. Your first true test came when the sound invaded Konoha with the pressured aid of the sand. A lot of good ninja died that day, all of them sons, daughters, mothers, fathers, brothers, sisters, husbands, and wives. They all had dreams, goals, and lives to live out, and yet they readily sacrificed them all for the good of the village. Without a moment's hesitation they defended their home, and through their actions Konoha was able to strike back and beat back Orochimaru and his army, saving thousands of lives. You helped too, and in a huge way by defeating Sabaku no Gaara in a way that would allow him to reform himself and become the Kazekage. But there's more to it than fighting for your home or for your friends. The next morning, Haku saw Kira to the gate, and after a long farewell which one of the gate guards had the misfortune to walk in on and retreat from hastily, Kira went one way and Haku went the other. As Haku wandered back towards Naruto's home deep in thought, he was jumped by 4 people and flanked into a group hug. "Hey, now we can have guys' night out when Kira comes to visit," Naruto remarked when they had separated. Haku stared at the blonde incredulously. "Why would I spend time with you guys when Kira came to town, just to spite her?" he complained. Then his eyes lit up in realization, and Sasuke joined them in a fist pound. "And naturally we'll take all your money, go shopping together, and talk all about your embarrassing personality quirks all night long," Hinata retorted, slapping Sakura a high five. Naruto laughed. "Oh yeah, what a blow to us. Our girlfriends are gonna talk about us. Horror of horrors. And shopping? For what? Kunoichi supplies? What a shame. My girlfriend needs my money to buy more kunai and steel wire. Woohoo." Naruto pumped his fist in mock excitement, then yelped as Sakura kicked him in the shins. Growling, he chased after her as she took off towards his house laughing, and the rest followed them, laughing and mocking the pair. This is the way it should be, Haku thought contentedly as he walked with his friends, laughing and joking together. He would miss Kira, surely, but she would visit him, and he her. He would see her again, he would make sure of it. Fighting for Konoha shows that you're willing to sacrifice your life, your dreams, for something greater. Next time you get the chance, look around the village. Watch an old lady take out her garbage, or a father teach his son a trade. The village is a place that allows us to have those dreams, those lives. Without it, we'd be homeless and surviving by the skin of our teeth like Nuke Neen, and that's no way to live. In Konoha, we have a chance to be a part of something greater while still making a name for ourselves as an individual. It isn't an opportunity to be wasted, and it is something to be defended with your all." Naruto stood behind a large pair of doors all but quivering with energy. Briefly reflecting on his appearance, he couldn't help but grin slightly. After accepting his transformation as a permanent fact of life, he had taken all his clothes to the nearest tailor and had them altered. He was now resplendent in a dark crimson vest covering a suit of body armor with a matching pair of black trousers. His hitai was tied proudly to his forehead with a cloth strip of the same color as his pants, black combat boots adorned his feet, and his reddish blonde hair resembled nothing short of a squirrel's nest when it wasn't tied back in the ponytail he had come to live with. He mused at the closed portal for a moment, then turned to his friends behind him. Sasuke and Sakura stood hand in hand, their relationship having bloomed into a steady progression towards the inevitable. The younger of the prodigal Uchiha had never gotten over a sense of debt to Konoha, and had been adamant about taking the most difficult missions for the team Naruto led, and before long Naruto was leaving more and more of that leadership to Sasuke, who demonstrated a ruthless mind for tactics and strategy, especially for missions that had them leaving Konoha for a week or more at a time. Sakura too, to no one's surprise, stepped into the spotlight as well, and with Sasuke planned their missions and fighting strategies based off of Naruto's partnering system for the team as Naruto became more and more occupied mentally with preparing for the position of Hokage. Before long, their 0% failure rate on missions attracted the attention of the other Jounin and Chunin of the village, especially Yumino Irika. Together, he, Sasuke, and Sakura made a pitch to the village council to introduce the partnering system into the village's training program, which was successfully, and overwhelmingly, approved, where a partnered team would be led by one Jounin. Naruto knew that Sasuke intended to propose today, aside from the faint nervousness in his Sharingan red eyes, during their guys' night out with Lee, Shino, Haku, Shikamaru, Chuji, and surprisingly, Itachi. The previous evening Sasuke had shown them all the engagement ring, a small but elegant single diamond affair with 2 small rubies flanking the center stone, all of which sat on a white gold band. "With my luck, she'll use it in combat to wreck some poor bastard," Sasuke joked, eliciting a raucous laughter which was quickly subdued by the realization of just how close to the truth that jab was. His gaze drifted to Haku, who was standing next to Hinata. Over the past few months, they had formed a solid and thoroughly unexpected friendship, the most surprised ones being the pair themselves. It had happened suddenly, and without mercy. Hinata was sitting at the table they all shared their meals at in Naruto's house when Haku came in. He didn't need the enhanced sight his demon gave him to see that she was quivering with anticipation. "Hinata, what's going on? Are you okay? Are you hurt?" he asked, mistaking her motions for nervousness or pain. Hinata, however, stifled a giggle. "Sure. Naruto-kun's coming," she admonished, activating her Byakugan. But as she did so, she paled. She turned to Haku and dashed over to him. "Haku-kun. Quick. Stall Naruto. I need to fix something." His mischievous instincts immediately alerted, he readily agreed and dashed out into the hall, almost plowing over Naruto. In a split second, Haku weighed out the pros and cons and decided that almost wasn't good enough, and didn't try to stop his momentum. The result was a small dust cloud out of which emerged the odd hand, boot, or yelp of pain. When the two split apart, Naruto and Haku were breathing heavily, Naruto closest to the threshold to the kitchen. They eyed each other warily with glares, but as the seconds passed they began to have to fight the corners of their mouths from uplifting. The build-up led to each being racked by fits of laughter, the pain of which doubled them over and even brought Naruto to his knees. When the amusement subsided, Naruto shot Haku a grin and turned to enter the kitchen. The minute his foot crossed over an unseen boundary, however, he was frozen in place. Literally. Then, 6 or 7 different seals went off at once, all of which covered Naruto in some sort of goo except for the last one, which released a cloud of feathers. Haku stared. Hinata stared. Naruto blinked once as Sasuke and Sakura entered the front door, Sakura dropping the gallon of milk they had just purchased and catching it on the arch of her foot at the last second, and Sasuke dropping his jaw lower and lower. No one moved. Then everyone with the exception of poor Naruto exploded into laughter. Hinata fell out of her chair, and Sakura and Sasuke could only support each other as they were left in stitches. Naruto groaned at their mirth and flared his chakra briefly. The resulting red flash incinerated the chakra-based materials that were coating him and left him as clean as he had been before he wrestled with Haku. Ignoring his friends, he began to cook breakfast as they seated themselves at the table, doing his best to hide a smile. As he did so, Haku sat across from Hinata and stared at her until she shifted uncomfortably and finally asked, "What?" Haku solemnly extended his hand, palm up, and looked at it pointedly before returning his gaze to her pearly eyes, which widened in understanding. She completed the high five, and a silent bond was instantly formed, the kind that forms between co-conspirators after a successful con. And they found that they shared that same mischievous nature, much to Naruto's chagrin. And as the months passed, it was Hinata, who was taking an active role in the administration of her clan and becoming quite the paragon in Konoha, who helped establish Haku as special liaison to Iwagakure, ensuring that the couple would be able to meet as often as possible. Haku, however, took to the post with a zeal he didn't know he had and displayed a tact for diplomacy and diffusing potentially disastrous situations into calm, friendly negotiations, becoming a well-known figure in Konoha in his own right. Naruto grinned at Haku, winked at Hinata who returned it, and turned his gaze back to the doors. Any minute now, he thought, as a noise began to seep through the walls and the doors in front of him. Finally, a voice cut through the silence. "I know you can do this, Naruto. It's something you've been preparing for your entire life. When everyone slammed you down for daring to exist, you made them regret it in the end. You've been worming your way into the hearts of everyone in that village, and everyone in villages across the continent, it seems. The Great Naruto Bridge? Seriously? Brat, not even Hanzo the Salamander or the legendary Sannin have anything named after them. Well done, kid. The will of fire burns in your soul, Naruto. It was given to you by your father, the Yondaime Hokage Uzumaki Erasure, and instead of wasting it or misusing it, you turned a potential curse into a powerful weapon and set for yourself the highest goal any shinobi can aspire to obtain. It was my honor to help you in fulfilling a small slice of your potential. At the end, Naruto, I no longer thought of you as a student, or even a good friend. I felt as if I had adopted you for Arashi's sake, and by his soul, Naruto, I hope you understand when I say your parents loved you more than anything else in the world and wanted nothing more than to watch you grow into a legend. You're like a son to me, Naruto. Inside this envelope is a scrap of paper with a seal on it. Memorize it and destroy it, then activate the seal with your blood. It will summon the scroll which contains the contract for the toads. I pass it on to you with the knowledge that you will in turn pass it on to your apprentice one day, should they show an aptitude for senjutsu. I present to you the Rokudaime Hokage, Uzumaki Naruto. The doors flew open and Naruto was assaulted by a sheer wall of noise from the cheering of the crowd. He walked out toward Tsunade, who was waiting with Uchiha Itachi, a small grin in place, Hatake Kakashi, a large smirk visible through his mask, Yumino Irika who was beaming happily, Tenten and her father Busho, Shino, Lee, Ino, Shikamaru and Chuji, Niji and Hinata's younger sister Hanabi, and the old ramen chef and his daughter. Naruto was pleased to see that Hyuga Hayashi was present on the roof as well as Sakura's mother and father who were in fact was as pink-haired as their daughter. Tsunade smiled as Naruto accepted the ceremonial robes of the Hokage and donned them, along with a ridiculously cool hat marked with the kanji for fire. When he was finished, Tsunade swooped him into a bone-crunching hug, and the cheers rose in volume, something Naruto didn't believe was possible and also something that caused Haku, with his enhanced hearing, to wince slightly. However, they all caught up with the new Hokage and took it in turns to break various bones in his body that Naruto didn't know existed with their powerful hugs. After Hinata was finished with him, Naruto paused until the color of his face no longer matched the color of his vest and turned to the crowd. He formed a series of 3 seals, then stepped up to stand on the rail that ringed the roof of the Hokage's mansion. He took a deep breath. "Shinobi, Kunoichi, and citizens of Konoha," he shouted, and the crowd hushed. He grinned wildly. "We're about to enter one of the greatest ages this village has ever experienced. The will of fire courses through our veins. Generation after generation has passed down the strength of the fire country, and now I stand before you today." He paused, then continued, softer than before. "The Hokages before me always put the village first, sacrificing themselves for the sake of its people. Citizens, let us march forward to a new day. For Konoha." Naruto yelled, pumping his fist. "For Konoha," the crowd roared. "For Konoha," he yelled, louder than before. "For Konoha," the crowd thundered as cheering erupted once more. Naruto lowered his fist and turned to Sasuke, winking. At that signal, Sasuke snatched Sakura up and, carrying her bridle, marched over to the railing and leapt up onto it, sticking to it with chakra, and set Sakura down. Naruto did likewise to Hinata, and the 2 girls protested loudly. "Now, I have a favor ask all of you. If you would all be so kind," Naruto began, fishing and fumbling around in his robes, "to be my brothers and my witnesses." His face lit up as his hand closed around a small felt box and pulled it forth. Sasuke did likewise, chuckling at Naruto's antics as he calmly pulled his from the sleeve of his Haori. Almost in unison, they accomplished the incredible feat of going down to one knee while balancing on a railing, and extended their respective boxes to their respective women, who by now had realized what was going on and were both well on their way to supplying Konoha's water for a year. "Hyuga Hinata," Naruto began, mouth turning in a grin. "Haruno Sakura," Sasuke echoed, trying not to smirk and succeeding. "Will you marry me?" they finished together. The ensuing silence weighed thick with tension as the entire crowd and inhabitants of the roof held a collective breath as Sakura and Hinata stared at Sasuke and Naruto. They glanced at each other through their tears but had to look away to stifle the laughter. Regaining her composure, Hinata looked behind her at her father, who was nodded and smiled warmly his approval. Hanabi gave her sister a thumbs up and a wink, while Niji shrugged, though his enormous smile betrayed him. Sakura's parents, despite their own tears, smiled and nodded to their daughter, who almost skipped with joy as she turned back to Sasuke. "Of course, Baka," Sakura said softly as she took the ring, admiring the light playing between the red and clear stones, and slipped it onto her finger. Hinata nodded furiously to Naruto and took her ring, which was a white gold affair with a single, brilliant white pearl flanked by two small sapphires. As they attacked their fiancés, the crowd erupted once more into raucous celebration. Not bothering to wait for the couples to separate, their friends pulled them off the railings before they lost their footing and passed them around like bottles of wine for congratulations. Despite the joy he felt for his friends as he thumped Naruto on the back and hugged Hinata, he couldn't help but feel a sharp tug in the pit of his stomach, and when the Hokage and his fiancée passed him he turned away and began to move. However, he was stopped and enfolded into an all too familiar embrace. When the arms let him go, he looked into smiling green eyes. "Miss me?" Kira jabbed. Haku laughed and picked her up, spinning her around and around while she joined him. The sun shone brightly, and the clouds mingled with each other as if the world rejoiced. "I'm off to fight the Akatsuki now, brat. I'll have Kakashi by my side, so if anything goes wrong at least I'll have the dependable White Fang at my back. Grow stronger, Naruto. I'll be watching closely." Jiraiya, Sannin of the Toad, proud godfather of Uzumaki Naruto. Naruto smiled softly as he ran his finger over those last 5 words. "So Dad named him my godfather, should have seen that coming," he chuckled, still in wonderment at that last revelation even after so much time had passed. Rising to his feet with a mild sigh, he returned the letter to its mount on the mantel of his home and stared at the collection of pictures which accompanied the letter, not really seeing them, lost in thought. "Naruto-kun," the voice called softly. He turned to see a beautiful woman walking towards him. With her slender figure wrapped in a white hakama, her dark blue hair spilled behind her head and rested on her shoulders, she was easily the most beautiful woman Naruto had ever laid eyes on. His dark red orbs locked with the woman's pearls until they were close enough for him to embrace her gently. "I can feel it stirring," he mumbled into her ear, inhaling the scent of lilacs in her hair. She tensed slightly, then relaxed into him. "It's been almost 3 years since you lost the Sharingan, are you sure?" Hinata asked softly, pulling away to look her husband in the eye critically. He grinned, and captured her lips with his. After a moment, he pulled away, a whispered "yes" by way of parting gift. Hinata shuddered, and hugged him tighter. "It's cold, Yumini, don't do that," she admonished playfully. Before Naruto could offer a dirty reply, she placed her finger over his lips. "Wait a moment, there's something I want you to see." She took his arm and led him through the halls of the Uzumaki complex to a formerly unused room. Hinata opened the door slowly, revealing an off-white interior and an assortment of kunoichi-related items, a small garden attached to the windowsill, a small stack of books, and in one corner, a stuffed animal bearing a vicious resemblance to a certain nine-tailed fox, though the fox's expression was adorably cute. In another corner, however, was a bed low to the floor. Curled up in the covers was a small girl. Dark blue hair spilled messily down her back, and, were her eyes open, solid and dark red orbs would be visible. She had yet to exhibit either of the bloodlines of Hinata or Naruto, but both hoped that they would mix and create something unique and wonderful for their daughter to distinguish herself from her already legendary parents. Naruto had caught his breath. "She's so wonderful," he whispered softly, to which Hinata responded by hugging him. "She's so strong, she'll be ready for the academy in a few years," Hinata said happily. Naruto grinned. "Irika's gonna kill me. Of all the things for her to inherit of mine, she got my prankster aptitude, and yours as well for that matter," Naruto said happily, poking Hinata in the ribs. Holding in her reflexive yelp, she eased themselves out of the doorway and down to their own room. As she did so, Hinata got on her tiptoes to whisper in her husband's ear. "It sure would be nice if she had someone her own age to play with," she said as sensuously as she could. However, Naruto was less than compliant. "She seems to like Haku and Kira's kid, and I can only thank Kami-sama that he takes Kira's side. And Sasuke and Sakura's twins are adorable," Naruto replied, completely oblivious. Hinata sighed and, gripping Naruto's face in two hands, pulled him into a scorching kiss that would have left a mere mortal man no more than a burn mark on the wood floor. When she pulled away, she watched him blink once, slowly. Then, oh, he grinned sheepishly, then yanked her to him and towed the door shut. As Naruto lay awake, contemplating, Hinata cupped his face gently. "Naruto-kun," she whispered sleepily. He turned to face her expectantly, and she smiled, closing her eyes. "Aishitaru's, Naruto-kun." And without warning, her breathing slowed to an even pace. Naruto smiled, and tucked a strand of her hanging in front of her eyes behind her ear. "And you, Hinata-chan," he whispered in reply, closing his eyes and succumbing to sleep. Next to him, the Hyuga heiress smiled in her sleep, and their dreams were calm and soothing, of the future that lay in store for them, and the future that lay in store for their daughter and, eventually, son. And Naruto and Hinata and their friends, after many struggles and many sacrifices, were finally able to rest. After victory and inevitable loss, they could finally lay down their heads in peace. What happens after happily ever after? Do the worries of the world simply get washed away by the immense tide of happiness that comes on the tail of a successfully resolved conflict? Nonsense. The world, it seems, is not quite so lenient. After all, the ending and close of one story is in reality the beginning and opening of a new story. Turn big problems into little problems into no problems, or so the saying goes. But there will always be problems, and in the eyes of a certain wrinkled old man a famine of problems was about to become a bountiful harvest. "For the last time, Aki, give me back my kunai," the young girl demanded. Her bluish-black hair fluttered angrily in a slight breeze, a hand extended open palm out towards the aforementioned Akihiko. It was met with a blown raspberry and an evil smirk. "Ah, what's the big deal, Nei-chan?" the pink-haired boy shot back nonchalantly, one hand held behind his head in a laid-back manner while the other twirled a kunai, presumably the stolen item, around by its ring. "You've got plenty of them, so I know you're not low. Unless," and the boy dragged his free hand down over his short hair to rest over his face in a mock-tragic pose, "this is his?" Querying rhetorically, he held the kunai delicately into the air by two fingers, as if gingerly avoiding contaminating it. The girl shrieked. "Uchiha Akihiko, so help me, I am going to kill you." Leaping forward, it was uncertain as to whether her target was the kunai or the hapless lad before her. Either way, her intent to maim, dismember, and murder was palpable to the old man watching from the side. "Haicha," the boy yelled gleefully, skipping to the side at the last minute, eyes twinkling. "I knew it. It's your precious gift. Your bond of love. I'll bet you OOF." Beset with rage as she was, Akihiko's bantering was no match for a woman scorned, and the elder sister ducked low and launched herself at the boy's legs, snagging one as they attempted evasion. With a poof of dust the girl locked the knee and yanked the foot behind her, causing Akihiko to lose his balance, and his unspoken taunt, and fall backwards to the ground. Not one to give up an advantage, the girl immediately went to mount her younger brother, who of course recovered quickly. The old man watched with unmasked glee as the youngsters pounded the living hell out of each other. Other passerby wandering in the vicinity of the park either slowed for a moment before continuing on their way with a helpless chuckle or ignored the scuffling pair. This, it seemed, was commonplace for this area, though the old man couldn't quite recall if this pair had ever scuffled here before. Abandoning his musing, the old man watched as the dust cloud began to settle around the siblings who were on their backs, panting. The kunai, it seemed, was nowhere to be found, but neither appeared to care at the moment. The boy sat up first. Shaking his head and brushing the dust from his no longer entirely pink hair, he hopped to his feet and extended a hand to the girl, who had resumed a normal pace of breath but had yet to rise. Akihiko grinned. "Damn, Kane, but you really pack a wallop," he offered, perhaps by way of an attempt at a truce. Whether Kay accepted it or not, the old man couldn't tell, but she did grab the proffered hand and used it to get to her feet as well. Brushing the dust from her bright red bike shorts and top, she smiled crookedly at the boy. Clean yourself up or Hahayui will murder you for me, she replied, brushing her hand against the black sleeveless shirt sporting the crest of the Uchiha and knocking a fair amount of dust away. Blanching, Akihiko scrambled to remove the rest of the dust from his clothing. Seemingly satisfied, he nodded in triumph before extending his hand to Kei. Here's your, Intending to return the stolen kunai, Akihiko was understandably confused. Where the kunai had been firmly grasped, an empty hand remained. Eyes widening, he patted himself all over and searched the aftermath of their skirmish before returning to gaze at his sister, whose expression could have been lightly described as demonic. "Aw, young whippersnapper, could you mean this piece here?" a voice called out. Whipping their heads to the voice's owner, the pair of siblings saw an old man sitting on a bench with a kindly face covered in wrinkles. Eyes twinkling blue under the sun, he held a kunai firmly in his palm. Guessing what had happened, Kei sprinted over to the old man and bowed several times. "We're really sorry, Aji-san. It must have gotten flung over here when we were fighting. I'm so sorry, thank you so much," she spluttered helplessly, numbly accepting the kunai being pressed into her hands. "Were you hurt at all?" The old man laughed and waved his hands. "Not a tad, young miss, not a tad." Finally looking up at the old man, Kei was greeted with blue eyes shining with kindness as he gazed at the youth. "Though it is getting dark, perhaps you and your brother ought to be heading home, yes?" he added, sounding concerned. "Shit. Let's blitz, Kei-ne," Akihiko yelped, running up to his sister. Grabbing her hand, they sprinted off as only shinobi could, taking to the rooftops with a few hops. The old man watched them go with a small smile, then lifted himself to his feet. Bones cracking, a cane appeared from the folds of his white robe that breathed perfectly despite the hot sun setting in the distance, and he began his trek back to his abode. As he walked, his mind wandered as it did and he found his thoughts dwelling on his own family. Independent of his conscious will, he realized his feet were taking him down a familiar path through the town and he accepted the course as a fact, closing his eyes and treading the steps by memory. Drawing to a halt, he opened his eyes after a moment. Black. Shiny black, somewhat reflective, and as he focused the writing became clearer and clearer on the memorial stone. Shifting from his own reflection to the writing on the wall of stone, his mouth slowly began to trace the sounds of the names from top to bottom. One by one he read them out, softly, slowly, never missing one, pausing gently after each. Down and across he went until finally, as he knew it would come to pass, the familiar syllables passed his eyes. "Hyuga," he enunciated softly. Sucking in a breath, he continued, "Hayashi." A voice softly spoke behind him. Smiling, he turned to face a beautiful woman. Long, dark blue tresses danced down her back as gentle pearls gazed into his own blue. Her white skin, unblemished by any mark or age, tinged slightly with red as she took his gnarled hands in her own and crunched them with an almighty grip of steel forged in the fires of battle. "Dear, Sakura-chan says you've been terrorizing her daughter again," Hinata said sweetly, still smiling, as the bones of the old man's hands began to strain under the pressure to stay connected to each other. With a small pop, the old man disappeared, or rather, the bold disappeared from the man, and a rather handsome, crimson-haired, sheepishly smiling face in the prime of youth replaced it. "Well, you know, she reminds me so much of Sakura-chan that okay, I'll drop by later and apologize." His excuse turned surrender dying in the air. The eyes of Pearl glared at bashful steel blues for a moment more before softening considerably. Then they disappeared altogether, buried in the chest of the crimson-haired man. After nuzzling for a bit, Hinata lifted her head to look at the names on the memorial stone that Naruto had returned his gaze to. "You miss them," she stated quietly. Naruto looked down at her incredulously. "Don't you?" he asked with no small amount of disbelief, turning to helplessness as she glared up at him again. "Baka," she whispered as she cradled her love's head in her hands, "of course I do." She grinned. "But I'd be more afraid of what happens when you have to meet them again." They'll have a lot of catching up to do with you, to say the least. I hope my father goes easy on you for my sake, at least, she added playfully. Naruto's head drooped with another helpless grin. Yeah, there's that. He pondered for a moment. I wonder what happens when the time comes. His question hung in the air as silence reigned. Some say we come back. Some say we go on to an afterlife. A few say oblivion, but I don't really think that's possible, Hinata offered after a spell. We definitely only get one chance at this life, though. Naruto nodded solemnly. Reincarnation doesn't sound too bad. I'd get to meet you again, after all, he finished grandly. Then he paled. If it's an afterlife, I hope you don't get to see everything that happens here. If Hayashi knew what I did to you almost every night, he'd dash. Whatever words the world's greatest prankster had planned were lost forever as a palm sought to become one with his spine by way of the abdomen. One trip to the Uchiha residence later, the couple arrived at their own front door to be greeted by a little lady with crimson hair highlighted with streaks of midnight blue. Good evening, my little demon. Naruto exclaimed proudly, tousling the girl's hair. A delighted grin spreading across her face, she closed the distance and hugged Naruto, the top of her head coming only to the bottom of his chest. Don't call her that, you brute, her mother said while whacking the offender across the back of the head. She'll start to believe you. Maika-chan, don't listen to a word your father says, Hinata cautioned as the girl kissed her mother on the cheek. You're 14 now, you should know better. It's okay, Ka-san. I like it, and whenever the other kids are around and Naruto calls me that, it inspires them with the respect I deserve. Maika said proudly, hands on her hips and nose turned into the air. Naruto groaned at the pet name and pinched her nose. Normal daughters call their fathers normally, he admonished, though the accompanying wink took most the sincerity out of it. Walking inside, he palmed his forehead in recollection. Taichi comes back until tomorrow night from his mission. Looks like it's just us for dinner again. Hinata smiled at her husband's memory. While he certainly had a lot on his plate to juggle, he could be absent-minded about the most important things. Squeezing Naruto's hand, she went with him to prepare dinner. After a nice meal and a pleasant evening, they lay in bed together with Hinata having claimed her rightful place against Naruto's side. Snuggled against him with his hand around her, she grinned. If you listen, you can hear her chattering away. I swear, she's as smart as you are and, like her father, applies it in all the wrong ways. Turning to frown at his teasing wife, Naruto hummed quietly. It's an incredible jutsu. Where we previously had to rely on the mind powers of the Yamanaka and others, now anyone can talk to anyone with a simple technique and a unique sequence of seals to identify the target. I know Kira was thrilled when we finished it and sent Haku and her off to IWA to have them try it out, though I'm sure the parents of Rock will be just as thrilled as we are. He grinned. Karma, Hinata poked him. Be nice. Haku and Kira have no idea what they're missing. Not that there's anything wrong with not having kids. They're very happy, after all, she added with a smile, thinking of the fiery girl and her mischievous husband. Naruto turned and kissed his wife soundly. I love you, he whispered. Grinning blue eyes flashed briefly, and Hinata gasped, barely managing to keep from shouting out. Mustering control over her volume, she beamed and kissed him again and again. You did it. I can't believe it, she said as exuberantly as possible while keeping her voice down. Then she glared, though the smile never left her face. That's how you got poor Kei-chan's kunai away, didn't you? Naruto chuckled helplessly. Akihiko was never one to hold on to a weapon in a fight, and it looked like one of them was about to have an accident, so I tried one of the old seals and it worked perfectly. I'll have to make sure to take it slow, but yours truly might be back to 100%. Hinata stared at his face, whisker marks barely visible after all the years, and resumed her snuggling, mind growing drowsy. You never cease to amaze, she muttered. Intelligently managing to refrain from a dirty wisecrack, Naruto kissed the top of her head and settled down for a good night's sleep, his mind wandering to earlier that day. Many of their friends awaited them, having gone on before them. Many of their friends were still here, with them. 15 years ago, the largest conflict the ninja world had ever known came to an end. Many, many lives were lost. Ever after the war ended, the elder generation too began to disappear, content to leave behind the world in their descendants' capable hands. 15 years later, Naruto mused, it seemed to be true, things really do get better. He activated his old eyes again, briefly, and with a whisper was looking at his daughter's restful form. She shifted in her sleep, then opened her eyes slowly. Looking up at the ceiling, her eyes seemed to lock with Naruto's. They flashed themselves and, smiling, Maikon nodded to her father before resuming her dreams. Shaking his head helplessly at his daughter's abilities, he closed his own eyes and drifted off. With the ones he loved by his side, Naruto looked forward to the future. Tomorrow was a new day, after all.